First, we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We're going to start a little bit different tonight. We're going to start with the interviews. And thank you very much, Mark, for coming and interviewing with the Audit Committee. We really appreciate it. As you know, we're really looking for people, and you stepping forward means a lot to us. So you want to tell...
Where's the camera? Because I'm getting extra money from Dunkin' Donuts for advertising.
Just hold it up as you talk. So did you have any statement? that
No
you wanted to make?
statement.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mark?
Careful.
What are you hoping to accomplish through your participating in the audit committee? And I do thank you for applying, because we do clearly have some need for it. But is there anything you're particularly looking to accomplish, Mark?
No, I just, you need somebody to be there so that the committee can function, and that's the reason why I decided to do it.
Any other questions for Mark?
Glad to see him step back up to the plate.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying retirement, though.
Yes. Glad to see you back, Mark.
Thank you very much, and as you know, we'll vote now. Oh, I'm sorry.
Not a question. Again, I just want to let my silence indicate that I'm less than happy that you're applying. I'm glad you're applying.
Thank
And I'm
you.
sure your experience will mean a lot.
Thanks.
I guess I have one. Mark, we have on the audit committee openings clearly for 2 3-year terms and remaining 1-year term. Do you have any preference for?
I would prefer the 1-year term.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And our next interview is with, sorry. Could you come in? Jeffrey, thank you. There it is. And Jeffrey, would you please state your name and also where you live?
Yes, Your Honor. Jeffrey David Klotz. My wife and I purchased a home at 487 Converse last January. We're relatively new residents. We have a strong sense of civic obligation.
Well, we really appreciate you coming forward. Audit Committee is an unusual committee. Not all towns have it, but that's what makes Long Meadow special. We really appreciate you coming forward. It's an important committee. Any questions?
Now, I'll ask the same question. Is there anything particularly on the audit committee, based on what you know, that you might be interested in seeing accomplished?
I really would like to sit back on the committee and learn as we go about. I mean, I can read the statements of the town, I can read the auditor's opinion, but as I come to understand what the residents expect and how the board reacts to it, I think the audit committee is a place where I can see how those two align or don't.
Any other questions?
Can I follow up with the same question?
Yes,
since
I
we have-
expected you to.
Although Mr. Borowski was here before, you seem to want the 1-year term. Do you have any objection to having to be appointed to a 3-year term or a 1-year
I
term?
don't, with the caveat that my wife works, I don't, and while we wish to have our eldest 3-year-old graduate Long Meadow High, if we plan and God laughs, barring a move, I would have no problem taking that.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you very
Thank
much. All right, and the process is, next time we meet, we vote, and then you'll get a phone call and be told to come in and when you can swear in and start the process. Okay?
Great.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for
Thank you
coming.
Can we follow this up with, I'd like to move that we appoint Christopher Casale to one of the 3-year terms on the audit committee.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
And I move that we appoint Margaret Landon to the 3-year term on the cultural council.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. And thank you very much for coming forward, those 2 people on our committees. We'll go ahead with the announcements at this time. The first and second quarter fiscal year 2014 preliminary real estate and personal property tax bills were mailed on June 28, 2013. Two separate invoices were mailed. The first quarter bill was due on August 1st, 2013. The second quarter bill is due November 1st, 2013. When making your November 1st, 2013 payment, please use the invoice labeled second quarter payment. If you're unable to locate your invoice, you can contact the collector's office at 567-1066 or email www.townhall@longmeadow.org, and we will mail you a new invoice. The collector and assessor's office regular business hours are Monday through Thursday, 8:15 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., and Friday, 8:15 a.m. to 12 p.m. You can pay your real estate tax and personal property bill in several ways: by person, mail, or convenient drop box located next to the front door at Town Hall, or online by going to the town's website at www.longmeadow.org, and under Quick Clicks, check on Pay Bills Online. Credit card payments can be made at the counter using either MasterCard or Discover. There is a fee. Thank you. I also wanted to let you know this Saturday is Drug Take Back Day, and we're still looking for runners and participants for the Wounded Warrior event on November 9th. Do we have any visitor comments?
You got a big schedule tonight, I'm not going to interrupt anything.
Okay, thank you. All right. Let's see. Why don't we start going through the warrant while we wait for Stephen?
You might want to indicate to people like Stephen's not here.
Stephen had a family emergency, and he's running a little late tonight, and we'll be rearranging our schedule. So we'll start with going through the warrant, and then we will probably be breaking when the town manager does come in, so we'll go to executive session for a short period of time and then come back to open meeting again. So do we want to go through this article by article?
Yes.
Okay. And Article 1. Any questions or problems, or should we start with the motion and then discussion on each one?
I move that we approve Article 1 as written.
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
I think just for people at home, Article 1 pertains to CPA money that has to be allocated into the different accounts. It's something that is statutory.
All right, any other questions or discussion?
I have a quick, you know what, did we get an updated version of the warrant in our packet for,
No.
okay, so we're operating off what we got last time?
No, I got a new one.
Where'd you
No, I
get
got a new one.
I got a
Under
new,
what?
I'll tell you. It's under old business. Warrants, special town meeting November 13th.
So there was one that didn't open before.
Wow.
Okay?
I don't,
Do you want to see?
Alice, you didn't get it under old business? Under the full file?
I printed it out.
No, see, I didn't open this before, because there's another thing in here that I didn't get. Yeah, see, I got this thing unable to read again. On one of them.
Jeez. It's also.
Stephen, I thought we'd go through the warrant first, since we have to do that, and then we'd break for the executive session.
Sure.
Does that work for you?
That'd be fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, any further questions on Article 1? Okay, we'll go ahead with the vote. All those in favor? All right, the article. Now we'll go on to Article 2.
I move that we approve Article 2 as written.
Second.
All right, any discussion on Article 2?
I have some discussion. I know we discussed this last time. This commentary below that says that $385,000 is a result of made to the school operating and capital budgets, $300,000. I mean, that's really an interpretation. It presumes that the original budget that was proposed by the select board was sort of the budget, and any change to that is an add-on to it. The reality is that what passed was a budget that had a very large number, of which some of it was in addition to the school budget, but again, money is fungible. So, again, this commentary, you know, is defensible. I mean, it takes a certain view of what happened at town meeting. I don't think it's appropriate because it's really sort of an argument rather than strictly factual.
Okay, any other discussion on Article 2? Yes.
First question I have for the town manager, is it still $385,000? Have there been any other items that were, you know, that may have adjusted those numbers? Do we think it's still going to be roughly 385?
The latest projection from the CFO as of a couple of days ago was still the number.
Okay.
And let me apologize for being late. I had a family issue I was dealing with, so I apologize for being late.
No problem. Okay, my other comment was that, you know, this board approved the GFOA budget presentation and standards, and one of them was to illustrate transparency or for transparency in budgeting, and that descriptive, while you might not like it, is doing nothing but being transparent and telling people exactly what was voted on at the floor town meeting and caused the budget to change. If there was no vote to change the budget, which was the budget presented to the town meeting, and you're right, that was, you're saying the assumption was that was the budget, it was the budget. If it weren't for those changes, this warrant article would not be here. So I think it's very descriptive, and I think it really conveys why we have Article 2 on the warrant. So, you know, we can have a debate about the wording of it and why you think it might be offensive or defensive, and that's fine, but it is exactly what the reason why it's there. And I think that's what the descriptor is really just to tell people, why are you asking for money in Article 2?
Okay, so why don't we go ahead with the vote? All those in favor of approving Article 2? All those opposed? All right, let's move on to Article 3.
I move to approve Article 3 as written.
Second.
Discussion? Okay, we'll move to the vote. All those in favor of approving? All those opposed? Okay, we'll move on to Article 4.
I move to approve Article 4 as written.
Is there- Okay, any discussion? No? All those in favor of approving Article 4? All those opposed? Okay, let's move on to Article 5.
I move to approve Article 5. I'm just going to say what the descriptor is for the debt authorization for the Forest Glen Water Pump Station.
Okay, a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, let's move on to Article 6.
I make a motion to approve Article 6, which is for the payment of prior year bills.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, we'll move on to Article 7.
I move to approve Article 7, which is as written, which is for the Ian Wax Memorial Tree of Courage, which allows Long Meadow High School to have an interest-bearing account for their donations.
Second that.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. Moving on to Article 8.
I move to approve Article 8, which is to move $100,000 or greater or lesser sum to cover the cost of consultants regarding the impact of the casino on the town of Long Meadow.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, moving on to Article 9.
I'm going to make it, but I move to approve Article 9, which is for $10,000 for the Department of Public Works for grounds maintenance for the clay tennis courts at Bliss Park.
I'll second that.
Discussion.
Actually, I do have a little bit of discussion on this. I'm glad that we were able to renovate the Bliss tennis courts. That was an eyesore, it was an embarrassment, and in fact, the money originally came from a donor, which really speaks well of that person's generosity. I guess the issue that I have with the $10,000 is that I was sobered substantially, as I think anybody who was at our last meeting was, about the budget situation that we're going to be facing next year, and somehow this $10,000 seems like it might not be the best expenditure. set against other things that we're going to have to spend money on. And for those of you at home, what I'm referring to is our finance director indicated that we're looking at a $680,000 deficit absent any changes to our assumptions. So somehow this $10,000, while not a large amount of money, it's not really an austerity item, which, we could be in that situation.
Richard?
Yeah, I stand opposed to this item, and I'm not opposed to the tennis courts, but I'm opposed to every time we ask something to be done in this town, someone feels that they must get money for that. We have rather substantial operating budgets in all departments. There's discretionary dollars. This was witnessed last year when our Director of Public Works said that he could fund, I believe it was $20,000 in customary fees or maintenance fees on the GPS system if we allowed him to buy a GPS system. And so I just say take half of that amount and we'll maintain the Bliss courts. But it's above and beyond that, Marie. I don't think it's fair to say I find it offensive, but in some fashions I do, that every time this board asks or the town asks somebody to do something, the first thing we have is their hands out asking for money to do that. It's almost like their budgets do not exist and that every penny in their budgets is allocated for down to the penny. Having many years budget experience, I know that's not true. It's impossible to be that way if there's discretionary dollars. We have a lot of discretion in how we spend our dollars. This is in the absence of seeing any justification that says there's no money in a multi-million-dollar budget. Is that correct?
For the public works? Sure.
It's a multi-million-dollar budget, and we can do the math. 10% would be 200,000, so we can see this gets down to, this is not even chunk change when it gets down to it, so it's a principal issue that I'm voting on. And I'm prepared, I'm not prepared to vote on it now, and I'm prepared to speak out at town meeting against this article. I feel that strongly about it. I do feel the courts need to be maintained, and I feel there's discretionary dollars enough in every budget in this community to take $10,000 and act like it wasn't even there, and we just do the work. Plus, I think there's a lot of different angles on this court besides the angles that we're taking. I think if we applied ourselves, we could even get volunteers to do this type of activity. There's a lot of people participate on the clay courts, specifically because they are clay courts.
Paul?
I'm going to oppose this article for a couple of reasons. One is when those courts were originally refurbished, there was an upfront cost to do that because they hadn't been played on in years. They had to take clay out, put clay in and so forth, get new netting and so forth. At that time, we were spending a little bit under $4,000 for someone to come on in and maintain those courts on a daily basis. Last year, that dollar amount, to the best of my knowledge, didn't change. The head of Park and Rec said that we needed another $10,000 to bring those courts back. I don't know, and quite frankly, I don't know what it means to bring them back because I don't think people are digging holes in them. I know there's work that needs to be done, but we have a line item right now in that budget for $4,000 to take care of those courts. And the other reason I'm going to oppose it is 2 weeks ago, Mr. Foster asked for a breakdown of what the $10,000 would entail, and we didn't receive it. And in lieu of that, I can't vote for this because I have no idea what the $10,000 is going to go for.
Mark?
Yeah, my concern is that the funds in our budgets of our departments are tightly budgeted, and there isn't surplus money in anybody's line item. I think over the years, we've done a good job of paring many of them down. And I've seen the effect of the select board many years ago saying, no, we're not going to pay specific money targeted at the tennis courts. And the result was the tennis courts were closed for a number of years and literally fell to pieces. I think we've seen the value of the tennis courts to the town residents, that they are used. Clearly, I would like to see the DPW department and the Parks and Rec department find a way to create whatever they need to do to open the tennis courts next spring without spending an additional $10,000 But it sounds to me that we also haven't heard, if we direct the DPW to open these tennis courts, what isn't going to be done. If it truly takes an extra $10,000, then something isn't going to be done, and we haven't heard what we might be trading off if we're not willing to pay the $10,000 to do this. So I agree that, Mr. Foster, it'd be nice to have gotten a breakdown of what this $10,000 cost is for, but it's also important to say, if we're not going to spend an additional $10,000, what doesn't get done out of the DPW budget in order to do this?
Go ahead, I'm sorry. Okay, after you.
I want to say I'm going to support this warrant item. We accepted a gift from a town resident to open those courts with a substantial amount of money, and in return, the Select Board made a commitment that they were going to maintain and care for these courts. Now, the $10,000 amount, I'm hoping that we will start to get true estimates like Mr. Foster's requesting, and would also like to start seeing completion reports, and where we could see, when we have a special warrant article, what was the estimates, what it ended up costing, and where we were. But at this point in time, we don't have that, but we do have the commitment this board made to open up those courts and provide a high level of maintenance, which I know there've been many complaints this year. We went with $4,000, and there were weeds, and there were problems, and the doors weren't always open, and I feel in respect to our past commitment that we were going to care for these courts. I support this article, but I also support going forward, we need to watch where that $10,000 is spent and how it's spent and the maintaining of it. I'll go with Stephen. He hasn't had a chance to speak, and then go back to Richard and then around.
Thank you. I guess, I don't know, obviously I don't know a lot of the background on the courts. I do know earlier this year when we received another donation to open them again, it was requested by the board that this should be a town function. We should not have to rely on private donations to fulfill the obligation of the town to the residents who want to see the courts back open. That's why we said some months ago that we would make an amendment to this year's fiscal year budget through town meeting to ensure that happens in the next fiscal year's budget, mostly because the money needs to be spent on the courts prior to adoption of the new budget. So that's the only reason why this article is here. I believe it was a request by the board. Secondly, and I do need to apologize to Richard and the board, I did meet with the Director of Public Works and the Director of Parks and Rec, and we went through what the costs were, what things do we feel weren't well planned for last year. As you recall, this past summer was the first summer where we hired a town seasonal employee specifically to maintain the courts. The courts are not maintained by Department of Public Works personnel for a variety of reasons, including the times that the courts have to be opened and then closed again. It's really a job for someone who just likes to work on clay tennis courts, because it's from 6 to 7 or so in the morning, and then from 6 to 7 or so again at night. Early on, a lot of hours tied up in it, and you have to, you're really early in the morning, then late at night. We're not keeping somebody on the payroll all day on the courts. So we went through, and then of course there were concerns with weeds. We went through how the best way to approach that is. Should we be handling it internally? And basically the next step is I asked them for a detailed work plan with associated cost estimates, so we'll know what the right way to do it is next year and how much approximately it will cost us. As you know, I think it's $7,000 to open the courts every season. That's going to be a recurring cost. We bring in a clay court specialist to do that. We don't have the ability or the knowledge, quite honestly, to open the clay courts. And I know what you're going to ask, and I have no idea what it takes to open the clay courts. I just know that it's a specialized company that people who own clay courts hire to do it. I think one of the clubs in town has clay courts, and they also, I think, retain the same company. So it is a specialized thing. I apologize for not having that report to you sooner. I know they are working on it, but really the intent of this is just to make sure that now that we've transitioned from private kind of volunteer donation attention to the courts, it's, and this was just year one of doing that we have a sensible system that's sustainable going forward. And of course, we welcome the generosity of others who care to see the courts open, and even though we were making this appropriation, we would happily accept donations to offset it.
Richard?
How much did it cost to run the courts this year?
Well, I think it was about 10,000, but there were not all the costs were captured. For example, the cost to do the spraying by parks personnel, that was done, but like those costs were only tracked to the court. So I don't have the bottom line number, but that, when I asked a number to run the courts next year, we figured it would need about 10,000.
If I was in a court of law, I'd say I rest my case. This is, and I'm not blaming Stephen or anybody, but sooner or later, we've got to stop, and we've got to stop giving money based on a promise of future expectations. These courts have been going up for 2 years. We should have some detailed accounting, what it's taken to open them. There's some disagreements I have with Stephen on the amount of expertise required to open these courts, but I see no change. I see same old business, and if we continue down this direction, we have no justification for this increase. It's just somebody says, I need $10,000.
Can I just respond to that, Richard?
I know I'm not finished yet, but you can't assume that I am. So, when's the buck going to stop? That's what I'm asking. This is 10, the next one's 15, the other one's 45. Well, Mark says that they pared down. In all honesty, we have zero evidence of any pare downs. We have zero evidence of what any operation costs at this town. We have zero total evidence of what it even cost to maintain these tennis courts last year. And I would have thought with the sensitivity on these courts, at least we would have had that document to flash down in front of us. We have some internal problems on tracking costs, and I've had so many years involved in the budgetary process in a public works operation, I just cannot believe anybody's that tight. I say, what happened to the money that was here last year for the GPS? That was dangling out free in the wind. Where'd it go? Who knows? So you can go ahead and embrace these requests as long as you want without justification, but I can no longer accept it.
Thank you.
Okay,
Any
I
other,
did wanna-
any other comments on the
Yes.
board? Yes, Paul?
I just want to correct a couple things, that the courts were not shut down by well, maybe they were by the select board. It was a recommendation of our first town manager, and it was to put up a pavilion there and at the tennis courts. And my first year on the board, I was able to at least successfully fight against the pavilion. Those courts were unplayed for at least 5 years. And I believe in the first year, it took a little over $10,000 to rehab those courts, in which they had no play for 5 years. Our first year that we had a part-time employee, that was not a seasonal hire by the parks, but and maybe it's classified as that, but we had a part-time employee who was ready to go there come April to open those courts and was told to hold off. We then didn't hire that employee and waited at least 6 weeks to hire someone else. And we're told that we needed another sum of money to reopen them. So it isn't, last year wasn't the first year that we had an employee. We had one the very first year. Last year was the second season those courts were played, or this past year, I should say, where the second season those courts were played. It cost us less than $4,000 to have those courts maintained during the year. When it comes to weeds, I would hope, because DPW was spraying those before it was open as a tennis court to kill the weeds. And you were on the board when we directed that, Mark. I think more importantly, 2 weeks ago, a question was asked by a board member to provide a breakdown, and here's the question. You want to approve $10,000 and say that it's needed, well, who came up with the number and why is it $10,000? If the director of Park and Recs and director of DPW can't come up with the exact reasons why we need an additional $10,000, which would actually bump that number to probably close to $15,000 in the budget, then it shouldn't be on the warrant. That's a simple request. If it was a rough estimate to put it on a warrant to be presented to this board for a vote, we should have the facts to back up that number, and we don't.
All right, well, I'll move the question. I don't think people are
It-
changing anyone else's views on this.
Well, actually, you changed mine.
Oh, I did,
So,
okay. Well, I'm so glad to hear that.
No, I mean, I think the concerns that you all are raising, especially you, Richard, about how we account for costs are valid. I think you're right. We ought to have a breakdown of that $10,000. That would be persuasive. But I guess I'm also particularly persuaded by the point that Marie made, which is something that I had not initially considered, is that what are we saying to the person who donated the money? And there was a commitment. And so, our failure to get our house in order, if you will, shouldn't really give us a bad name to that donor, because that donor doesn't care whether we get our house in order or not. So, I think we ought to approve this $10,000, or at a minimum, I take it, we're voting whether to have this on the warrant, right?
Yeah.
I mean, why not allow people to vote? I mean, so however we might feel about it, there's no reason, I don't think, to allow people not to be able to vote on it and allow them to decide. And the points that you all raised, that might be ultimately persuasive.
Okay, I'd like to move the question. All those in favor of approving the warrant? All those opposed? Okay.
That warrant article.
That warrant article, exactly. Moving on to Article 10. Is there a motion to approve Article 10?
I would move to approve Article 10.
Okay, and is there a second? No second?
It's the study, DPW study.
This is the article for the DPW consultant to come in and study the organizational management, operations, and resources of the DPW. Is there a second on it? Well, I think I'm allowed to second it to bring it to discussion.
That's a new one.
Yes.
I don't know if the chair's allowed to second a
Actually, I
motion.
found out I'm even allowed to put a motion in.
Really?
It's not traditional, but it's allowed.
Oh,
I
we'll have
had to
check-
dig that one
I'll
in.
have to check
It is
that one.
allowed.
Yeah. So, any discussion on Article 10? I guess we're going to have some. Yes.
I guess I'm perplexed. I thought we had discussed this previously, and we decided that we did want to do a study of DPW's operations. I think we're all in favor of that. So I guess I'm not sure where the hesitance is.
It wasn't direct hesitance, they just did a little slow motion. We're allowed to have some slow motion. I have concerns for the, and I'm glad the town manager is here. And I know he was jumping up and down with me because I support this motion, but it wouldn't have gone to waste tonight. I do have some concerns for the statement that is written up. We have the authority under Mass General Law to do an investigation ourselves as a select board. And we can control that investigation, then we release it when the findings are brought in. I'm very concerned with the intent of this study. The way this is being written here, it's skewing off a little bit from the direction I thought we were taking. It says, town prepares to move forward with the replacement of the current DPW facility, the organizational structure, the management, operations, resources of the department should be analyzed. The primary goal is to assess if the current level of the division of resource accurately reflects the needs of the town both today and in the future. No such analysis has been performed since DPW was reconfigured during the charter change. That is a piece of this puzzle, but I'm more concerned with how are we operating our Department of Public Works as opposed to best maintenance practices that are used across the Commonwealth.
Do you want to change the wording on the description, or do you want to change the article itself and retaining it to study? How would you like to modify the wording there?
First of all, I'd like to know how the town manager feels to what I just said, because I'm not going to get hung up too much on words, except I'm not going to be in support of a statement that just goes out and says that we need more people without analyzing what we're doing and giving us against the best maintenance practices.
Now, the RFP was placed in our packet. Is it concerns about the RFP?
My packet will not open as I
think it was put in the last meeting had it, too.
I have not seen it.
Oh, okay.
I asked for it, but I haven't seen
Yeah,
it.
it was in the October 2nd meeting packet, and then I believe it was put again, so I'm sorry you had trouble with this one.
Well, I can't open anything with the iPad. So that's my concern. And the town manager can reassure me of that's in fact, but the way this reads, there's more emphasis put on organizational structure, management, and resources of the department, and That is true, that is part of the study, but I want to know, are we running that department the way we should be running that department in accordance with what is the norms in the state? And in
So-
accordance with all the laws and regulations and overshadowing things that cover a Department of Public Works?
I can answer that. Yes. Well, are we? I don't know. That's what the study is intended to find out. And so even though the article forms all say in 50 words or less, so obviously we can't append the scope. But one of the work items for the study is to compare and contrast structures, methods, and resources of the department to determine industry benchmarks and best practices in other comparable municipalities in Massachusetts and New England for management and staffing. So, I mean, Richard, exactly what you're saying is exactly what we're trying to get to.
I've not seen this, and I've asked for it, but I didn't get it.
I'm sorry,
I didn't realize
we got to
until today
take
that you're
care of
still
your,
having
Yeah,
trouble with the packet
I've
downloads.
not seen it. Anyway, that's my concern. If the town manager can assure me that what I've just uttered out in my words will be met in the final scoping statement, then I'm in agreement with the study.
okay. All right, so
I
what
can
we,
give you my assurances. Here's a copy.
I get my own.
You get your very own.
yeah,
I'm
and
sorry, Richard.
what we can do is we can actually, we can address that on the RFP if you're satisfied with that, because that's
Yeah,
something
because
we'll be
this is
discussing later.
just assigning money
Yeah.
anyway.
Any other comment? I'm sorry, Mark.
Yeah, I have a bunch of issues with the article. First of all, my personal concern is I don't think it's going to pass on town meeting floor, and I say that with all due respect for the need to do this. One of the things we did is we started talking about looking at a DPW site, and somehow our DPW site search morphed into, well, let's do a study of the department and the department's operations. And once again, we put our site search on hold, literally at the mercy of completing a study, which I know some of us, I guess, I thought all of us, had gotten a draft of the RFP, but I'm still not convinced that the deliverables from this report lead to a decision on what to do with the site, because they're totally separate. And so, I have no problem doing a management consultant or efficiency or anything else you want to call it, study on any department we have in town. And clearly, the DPW as a multifaceted, highly visible, and certainly a major financial portion of our budget might as well go first of all the departments we have to do. But I think the response from town residents is going to be, why are we spending $35,000 to, as I say, borrow our watch and tell us what time it is for a consultant to tell us what's going on? And I'm disappointed that it's apparently holding up any progress on moving forward on the DPW facility.
Actually, Mark, I need to correct you on that, is that this is a parallel. It's not holding up. The moving ahead on the DPW project will not wait for this report to be done. So we want to get this going, and as you'll see later on the agenda, we're going to be discussing our next step on the DPW site. The town manager did feel that an operational consultant in understanding how to, a site really has to do with operations, and we don't want to build a site for the way DPW is operating now, but how they should be operating in the future. So that is dovetailed as part of the project, but it's definitely not being held up. I agree with you, that's not something we can be doing. Paul, did you want to say?
Yeah, my concerns with Article 10 is that we've done a study on our fleet for DPW, and we got that study and nothing happened. We didn't adjust the fleet upwards, downwards, sideways, or whatever. And I believe that cost us in a range of $35,000 to $50,000, somewhere around there, for the fleet study that we did. And we didn't even listen to it. So we retained the old vehicles, we didn't get rid of anything it said to get rid of. We upscaled, even from the report that said to buy this size truck, we bumped it up and said, because the DPW director said, I'll get more use out of it. It didn't, so we did a study that cost the town tens of thousands of dollars, and we didn't even adhere to the study that we said we were going to adhere to. The other concern I have with this is that I haven't heard one word that the facility or that department has already been taken a look at by the town manager or this board or anything else, and said, we need to know whether or not we're doing what we need to do. My concern is another tens of thousands of dollars to town residents, And are we going to actually abide by that report? And Marie, to have the study going on at the same time as the site selection, I understand that, but if you don't know what you need, I don't know that we can then go and look for something if we don't know what we need. I know we know we need a certain amount of trucks, but is the study going to talk about outsourcing? Is the study going to talk about, getting rid of plowing and hiring out-of-town contract, or outside of a town contractor to plow our streets? And I don't think that's the detail it's going to go into, but I think we need to make some of those decisions before we pay for a study that's going to cost $35,000, and we haven't done that. We haven't been told that we should or even considered outsourcing one way or the other, whether it's good or bad for the town.
Okay,
But I just think that the issue is we already spent tens of thousands of dollars for a report on vehicles for DPW, and we're not even adhering to it.
Thank you, Paul. Alex, did you want to?
I do, I guess I am a little concerned that this study would be focused on a new facility, because we may or may not get a new facility, or we don't know when it's going to be. I do think that there is a consensus that we do need to look at DPW's operations. And I think we need to have somebody come in from the outside to do it. I think that's the only way that you're really going to take a hard look at the organization. This is a common thing for companies to do. It's a common thing for agencies in the federal government to do. So I guess if we don't approve this, I don't know where we are with DPW aside from just continuing on the way it's been.
And I support this article. In fact, I was pushing, saying I wanted it on the fall town meeting rather than the spring town meeting, because one of the big concerns I have is we're building or renovating a new DPW site. I think everyone went down there and realized the current facilities are inadequate for the amount of money that we're spending on our department, the amount of people working down there, and what we're expecting, which is a modern, top-notch DPW. I have been taught, once I entered this board, that one of the serious problems we have with DPW is that it's reactive, it's not programmatic, and that we need to bring it up to, not the 21st, to the current century and the current way things are supposed to be run. And so you're asking for a major overhaul on the way things are done, the way money's being spent, the way we are estimating projects. And DPW is the biggest game in town. I mean, when you look at the budget, I sat down and started adding up the budget before charter change and after charter change. DPW is the biggest expansion that we have, but yet we're all complaining about maintenance not being done, the fields don't look right, we're bidding things out. So I felt that the biggest concern this board had was the way that DPW was operating. So let's come in, we had a new town manager, let's decide not only where we were, but how we're going to get to where we want to be. And I thought we had all been discussing that a professional could do that for us. Now, I know the RFP's been worked on, and I've been getting frustrated because I wanted the RFP up and going, and this really moving a month ago, and now I'm surprised to hear we're coming up to an actual vote to give money to it, and there's no consensus on the board, which really surprises me, but, we can step back from this, and we can look at it at the Springtown meeting, and we can spend more time looking at the RP, go to the actual site and deal with the site first. I just thought that this was something that everyone felt was really a top priority in town. But if we don't feel this way, I say we move to a vote and we move on. We can do this in the Springtown meeting when the board has had more time to really decide what they're looking for.
It's not worth me addressing some of the questions?
I'm not sure if there's questions. People seem to feel very confident and that they're uncomfortable with this at this point in time. Stephen, if you do want to say something, then we'll move back on to Richard. I'd like to move it to a vote so we can, because we have new articles we're talking about putting on the warrant.
Okay. Just briefly, I understand all the concerns being raised, and I think the ongoing dialogue, since certainly my first day here, has been one that is, I want to say, nearly every single meeting. There's been dialogue, certainly, or commentary about it, certainly outside of the select board meetings as well. And and I'm trying to assess why all those comments are generated and why the perception of the DPW is the way it is. And I spend more time on this agency than any other, quite, I think appropriately so, because it's the largest budget driver and is so visible and responsible for so much important work. And the director and I feel like with the nature of not only, not only the new high school coming online, but also additional fields being created as a result of this project, with some transition at one of the division head positions, and really an eye towards, again, moving into a new era with hopefully a new facility. We want to make sure that if we're going to design a facility around a department, which is what you do, that the department itself is as efficient and structured the right way. So when you talk about what functions are going to go in the building, let's make sure we have all the right functions and the right number of people assigned. Richard and I were at a conference about using statistical analysis for performance measurement. And, one of the things to talk about is those metrics for best practices.
Right.
That kind of analysis hasn't been applied, and that really guides how much you should have in terms of personnel for certain functions and things like that. And I'd really, and in fact, I'm going, what we're looking for here is an appropriation because we want to get started right away. If this isn't approved, I fully intend to pursue this as a budgetary item for fiscal year 2015 because I think it's necessary. Because I think the comments and questions and concerns and wondering about what is the DPW, what do they do, do they have enough to do what they're doing, are they efficient as they can be? I agree that all those questions should be asked. And we just want to get some outside expertise because sometimes you can't answer those questions just, from an internal standpoint. And so that's why I think this is an exceptionally important thing for the operation, and I'm hoping the select board will give us a chance to do it.
Thank you, Stephen. Richard?
Yeah. What we have in town is a homegrown organization in our public works. To my knowledge, it's never been evaluated. You gonna make it? It's never been evaluated by any outside activity for concurrence with approved standards or what should be done. It's basically been passed down generation of director to generation of a director, and it's on a level of understanding of what we do. And although it's from the surface, a lot of times this may seem appropriate, it's when you bring in a subject matter expert is when your eyes start to open, when you find out how many things you're not doing appropriately or how many things are not being documented appropriately. How efficiencies can be increased that right now are that we're, as you could say, stumbling through. It's a healthy process. Whether we do it now, whether we do it later, it's up to the board. Whether we do it, that should be automatic. We do not have anybody on staff that can do this evaluation. If we did, we wouldn't need to do this evaluation. The select board cannot do this evaluation, so we have to go to an outside expert. I sent the Andover study to Stephen, and I don't know if anybody else on the board saw it or not. It was a very thorough, in-depth study of their operation, to where they brought up many, many, many items which the organization was used to doing but wasn't appropriate to be doing anymore. There was inadequacies in there, there was inefficiencies, there was a multitude of things. I do stand with Paul on one thing that irritates me. We went out for an auto study. We did the study, and then we never implemented the study and held the feet to the fire for implementation. That was wrong. It will be wrong until the day we take our last breath. I would anticipate that this study will not be dealt this way. I'm encouraging for the select board to be deeply involved in this study, in the review process of this study, even if we have to enact the fact that by Mass General Law that we're doing the study as a select board function. I can't talk against it because I firmly believe that this is an important step, and it's a step sooner or later we will have to take. Mark and I have sat here tonight and had both extremes on whether Public Works has too much money or don't have enough money. This would tell you where they're sitting, because these people come in with books and they say for every 1,000 square foot, this is how much FTE you need. And they methodically go through it, and then they go into the procedures and say, you're not doing this, you're doing this, you're not doing the accounting. We've just had a couple questions here tonight that Stephen doesn't have the documents he can flip in front of me, so we know we're not doing some things that we could be doing or we should be doing to answer questions of this board. At that, I'll just close it down. I have to support it because I firmly believe we need it. Timing-wise, I'm open on the timing.
Okay, I'd like to move the question then. All those in favor of warrant 10? All those opposed? Okay, let's move on to Article 11. Do I have a motion?
You don't, there's no, it's not
We don't need to
appropriate, you
approve?
don't do anything.
Oh, we don't have to approve.
That's
Actually, I'd
11,
like to-
12.
I'd like to make a motion that the Select Board endorse Article 12.
Is there a second? Okay, I would have difficulty seconding it, and the reason is that our council has sent a letter, which I put in front of everyone today. I had, during the subcommittee meeting, we were wondering if this would be a concern of having the board take a stance on Article 11. And Article 12. Article 12 regards the vote on whether to oppose the licensing of the issuance of a license to operate a casino in Springfield, which is the no casino vote, as it is known around town. And it was recommended by council that as a board, we don't take a position, though everyone, of course, individually can vote the way they want to during the meeting. So I won't be seconding it. Is anyone else seconding it?
Well, since we already had discussion, I'll second it. And I'll say that I don't have a problem taking a vote, Alex. I'd like for us to take the vote after, I would recommend we take the vote after our forum, because I think we need to hear from people, good or bad. I'm disappointed that this document came today. We asked council 2 weeks ago if this was something that we should partake of, and it took 2 weeks to get this, and we got it on the day of a meeting and handed right before the meeting. And I think that is more of an issue than whether we take a vote on a casino. That advice came 2 weeks late. And I wouldn't vote tonight, Alex. As I said to the last meeting, I think it's appropriate for us to take a vote after the forum.
As long as there's discussion. I think what we individually think is certainly up for discussion, but as a board, I think that there's potentially more harm with us taking a vote that would not support this and following the advice of our special legal counsel rather than not taking a vote at all. I think that my personal opinion is, from a board point of view, that when we're sitting down to negotiate with somebody, whether it's MGM or not, or somebody else, I'd have a very difficult time either negotiating in person or through proxy, which is our attorney, saying I'm negotiating in good faith, when in fact I've already taken a public position as an organization, one way or the other. And I think that not taking a position strengthens and I think this was borne out by what we got from our special counsel, strengthens our negotiating position, and more importantly, potentially taking a vote weakens our negotiating position. I'd suggest that we defer this vote until potentially after we've begun negotiation with MGM, certainly, but certainly after our town forum.
Any other comments? All right, so,
I'd like to comment, since it was my motion. I think it's entirely appropriate that we take a position on this because we're here to lead. There are probably few people in town who've spent as much time on this casino issue as we have, and people are looking to us. I mean, there's nothing more important on this warrant, in my view, than the issue of whether the casino is going to come to Springfield. It's entirely appropriate that we do take a position on whether we want MGM there. In fact, the Gaming Commission has indicated that the enthusiasm or the lack of enthusiasm by surrounding communities will be a factor. There are other cities and towns in Massachusetts who have taken a position against a casino. In fact, there are towns in the Metro West area who have banded together to oppose a Milford casino. Now, those towns are not shrinking flowers. Those towns realize that whatever they're going to get in mitigation, if anything, is going to be pretty thin gruel, okay? And just so that we understand one another, if you go to MGM's website, what they have committed to doing publicly in terms of mitigation is to offset impacts to the downtown Springfield area. So this isn't even a matter of believing MGM's promises, because MGM hasn't promised us anything. Now, this letter from the attorney does not say that it would hurt our ability to negotiate a mitigation agreement. It's just a very general statement that, against it. I think it's poor advice. My faith in them as attorneys is undiminished, but this position, I think, is not well-founded. And they certainly do not articulate any specific ways in which our ability to negotiate a mitigation agreement would be impaired. And if I might finish, our being cowed by this concern that we're not going to get quite as much money from MGM is just a way of silencing us and silencing other towns. Because remember this, if this casino comes to Springfield, it will not be because a lot of people wanted it. It will be because a lot of people did nothing. And I don't want us to be part of the group that does nothing.
Okay, you've said your piece. I think that saying that we're failing to lead, I think it's actually that we feel that we're as elected officials, that we must represent what's in the town's best interest right now. And according to legal counsel, it is not saying that we cannot vote on this. It's suggesting at the board, since we're in the middle of negotiations, we don't. So that means there is no motion on the floor in regards to the warrant, so we're going to move on to the next.
Actually, Paul
There was never
seconded
seconded. Was it second?
Yeah, I
You
did.
did, I'm sorry. I'd like to move the question. All those in favor of approving the article,
No, it was to endorse
endorse
Article 12.
Article 12? All those opposed? All those to abstain?
You can't abstain.
I can't abstain? Okay, oppose. Oppose endorsing, I guess that's the word I was trying to say. I don't feel we should endorse it at this time. We are going to have another article. We were talking about some additional articles.
I did, yes. One proposed article, and I apologize for not being in the packet, the information that was needed for the article was gained today. And that's with regards to upgrading, or not upgrading the signals, but adding some additional equipment to the traffic signals at Long Meadow Street and Converse Street. We met with the signal consultant, and he believes that we can run some wires and install crosswalk signals, pedestrian crosswalk signals, and a new cabinet, which is desperately needed, for about $25,000. Now, the controllers and all the things we've talked about that make it complicated and expensive to redo the whole intersection will remain, and the main controller is a 1970s, mid-70s era analog controller, so we're not replacing that. This would just be essentially a short-term fix to help the pedestrian situation until we can do a reconfiguration and upgrade of the whole signal system. So we met with that, and so based on his verbal estimate today, we would like to recommend an appropriation of $25,000 to do that installation.
And we don't have that written because you could.
I do have the form, and I apologize again, I was out of the office today
Yeah.
attending to a family matter. And so I have it here, I'll happily pass it around. But I can read it too, it just says, to see if the town will vote to transfer from available funds to the treasury a sum of $25,000 or a greater or lesser sum for the purposes of installing pedestrian crossing signals at the intersection of Long Meadow Street and Converse Street. And that would of course include Englewood. Or take any action relative thereto. And it says, currently traffic signalization at the intersection of Long Meadow Street and Converse Street does not allow for the safest pedestrian crossing. This article would allow for signalization improvements to safer pedestrian traffic to enhance safety, I guess, at pedestrian traffic at the intersection.
Is there a motion?
Can I ask a question of we have a traffic committee or safety committee, I'm not sure which one it's called, that has met for years, I mean, as long as I know that we've had a town manager, and no one deemed that crosswalk as a hazard. Now, I know you were out there because I saw you and the chief and roughly a half dozen neighbors on one particular day. So I'm assuming the traffic committee has met and has determined that it is a hazard. And my question would be to the traffic committee is, why was that decided now? And I know someone got hit by a car, I'm not talking about that, but why was that decided now that it was a hazard? You weren't here for the last 6, 7 years, or 9 years of having a town manager, but that committee has met, and never once have I heard that that intersection is bad. Now, I know there's some things we can do, maybe we can paint crosswalks in the meantime, because the work still needs to get done, but are the lights already synced to the point where all 4 lights can stop when the button's pushed, or they just don't have the capability of doing that right now?
It would be, I believe at this time, you'd get a pedestrian signal going west or east to west across Long Meadow Street when Long Meadow Street had the green light. Excuse me, that's the problem now. When Long Meadow Street had the red light. So you'd basically be going with the green light across Converse and Englewood. Or crossing, like if you're going along Converse and crossing over Long Meadow, go down to Englewood, you get a pedestrian signal along the green light for that direction. And in terms of the history on this, as I said, I don't have a lot of it, but I do know that in December 2000, there's a intersection reconfiguration plan that I saw that was presented at that meeting from December 2010. The reason why it's never been done is it's over $1 million. And it is on the Transportation Improvement Program, that's the state-funded thing, so it's in line. And I would further add that in terms of the 3 major signalized intersections that are affected by a lot of these same factors, Forest Glen and Converse Street on Long Meadow, and then Laurel and Converse, from a accident standpoint, this is the safest of the 3. And so when you look at, engineers, they look at crash rates and traffic counts and things like that, and that's how they analyze intersections. And so I think even though we knew it was hazardous, by the measures that they used to rank these things, it was not the most hazardous. Certainly the unfortunate incident with the boy, and thank goodness he's okay, highlighted that for pedestrians it really is kind of a tough intersection. We've had different signal contractors that we worked with in the past. I can tell you that when this question's been asked of them, the solutions seem to always be out of reach. So when we met today, and he came up with something that seemed attainable, I was like, well, why didn't we do this before? And I think they just haven't gotten that story before. So I'm cautiously optimistic when they get to do the exploration of, like, when they get into pulling wires and connecting to the controller and everything, it works out to be as good as he's laid it out. But certainly we want to be able to have the appropriation and commit to doing the work as soon as possible.
Okay. So one question I have is, right now, can someone push the button and traffic stops 4 ways?
No.
There's no capability, even with the control box there?
I don't know if we can even add that capability because of the controllers are so old. But that's something that we will, he came out and measured the site and opened the cabinet and, did a kind of a 3,000-foot analysis. As we get into the work, we'll be able to figure that out more squarely. But at least he figures that he can upgrade the buttons, get the crosswalk signals going, and at least have what they call a concurrent phase, where you cross with the green in that direction.
Richard?
There are push buttons up there.
There are, but they're not really functioning.
Okay, well, that brings up a much larger problem. How many other intersections do we have in town that are non-functioning?
I have to defer.
That's a loaded question.
Yeah.
It is a loaded question, but it's an appropriate question. For your Director of Public Works at this point, they've had an accident, and he said this one's not working. I would think by this time somebody would know exactly how many we don't have working and be in front of this board now with a $500,000 request if that be deemed appropriate. okay? We don't have any idea where we're standing on this issue. I looked at it too, and I'm surprised to hear you say that the buttons don't stop the lights, and I don't know how long that's been broken, but,
It's actually not clear from the controller, because the controller's so
Yeah.
old, it's
'Cause
not
there's-
clear. I mean, the button, you push the button, the lights change. But you still have the issue of the southbound having the green light when the southbound going left on the Converse has the arrow, and that was the issue. So the answer is, the buttons may work, but they don't stop all phases of traffic.
with the button, if it's working the way it should be, should stop, all lights should turn red.
I don't think there's a dedicated phase built
Okay.
into the controller.
I noticed briefly when I went through town, there's very few of our lights have pedestrian walk signs on them. Very few. And you talked about the safety committee, and you kind of question why you have a push button without a little walkie thing. It's just that reassurance, especially on a split intersection like we have down there. I propose it's piecemeal, again, and I'm not diminishing that we had an accident. But again, we're going to authorize $25,000 when we have a much larger program and we don't know what it is in front of us right now.
Actually, at this point, we don't have a motion. Is there a motion to support this warrant?
I'll move that we support the
I'll
warrants
second
and
it.
have discussion.
Second.
Oh.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, well,
Didn't want to step on you. You
okay,
can do
any further
second.
discussion now? Mark?
Yeah, clearly, if you'd asked me a month ago, how the Converse Street and Long Meadow Street crosswalk worked, I'd have had no clue, and I think most of us on the board wouldn't have had a clue how it worked or whether it was working or not. We did have an incident there that luckily there was no permanent damage as a result of it. But I guess to some degree, I look at this and saying, are we pulling $25,000 as an estimate based on we've got this artificial deadline of the special fall town meeting and we need to get funds appropriated for it? Or ought we make sure we're doing this right, finding out what it costs? Because if this had happened in December instead of in October, I'd have spoken out here and said, we have to do what it takes to make this work and fix it. And that's why we have a reserve fund, that's why we have available funds outside of the town meeting and certainly free cash. My concern is that we feel that we're doing this quickly as opposed to the most proper way to do it. And if that's the case, I'd rather encourage us to take an extra week or two, even if we miss the special fall town meeting for funding, and do this, or word this in a way that says not to exceed. But what happens if the right way to do it is $28,000 instead of 25? I mean, $25,000, we heard was what we called back of the envelope kind of best guess. But it could be $15,000 and probably be $29,000 or $30,000. And I'm concerned about that. I'd rather make sure we knew what we were doing, had the right design, and then did it. And I'm going to vote for this because I think we need to move it forward, but I think we need to get the estimate right, and more importantly, the project designed properly, rather than just expeditiously.
Paul, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just, what dawned on me is we actually have a line item in our budget for traffic lights. I understand that, this would be a warrant article, but I don't understand why we're waiting for the warrant article and we already have money that can be diverted from the regular maintenance of traffic lights, for example. Put this on there as either reserve fund requests, because then we'll have the written estimate that could go back in to replenish the traffic light. And the issue, quite frankly, is if we go to town meeting, this gets voted down, then it doesn't get taken care of. And I don't know how big our traffic light line item is. I can't find it on here. I got the raw data, or the bigger budget. I think we need to do it. I just think that we shouldn't wait 4, 6, 8 weeks, because there's gonna have to be an RFP issued and all that other stuff. I think we should do this, and if we get a better estimate, we can always pull it off, or go to reserve fund request before town meeting. I just think, all I was saying or suggesting is that we already have a traffic light line item in our budget, or signal light, that maybe the work can start without that going to it, and then pull it and go to the finance committee for a reserve fund request for the maintenance dollars.
And I just have a clarification. We've actually amended numbers on the floor, haven't we?
Well, the way this is written, it's $25,000 to a greater or lesser extent. So we can approve this and read a warrant on the town floor that says $28,262 or $18,000. We can
Okay.
do, put any number we want to in it. This is a placeholder right now,
Okay.
the way it's written.
All right, I'd like to move the question, though. All those in favor of approving?
When did you move the question so quick on this? We were still in discussion. Are you in a race tonight?
Actually, I am trying to move the meeting along quickly for
I
the
would-
town manager,
I
because we
believe-
we also have a gentleman on the green communities. Yeah, and we've got to get to executive session. But if you want to have another comment?
Nope.
Before, can we make it Article 10A?
Article,
No, just put it in there, and we can always pull it, Stephen. I mean, we have the.
No, I'm saying in the
he's-
order,
in the
having
order,
it come
'cause
ahead
you
of-
wanted
It
the
has to
last
come
one.
ahead of
The
citizens
petitions, okay.
petitions.
Okay.
Okay.
It will come ahead of
So,
citizens petition.
would be-
This becomes 11, the current 11 becomes 12, the current
Okay.
12 becomes 13. I mean, that's the way it's got to work.
Oh, okay, thank you, sorry. I
All
didn't
right,
clarify.
all those in favor of the new Article 11? All those opposed? Okay. You had another article, a new article with it, Paul had requested?
I did, but we have, and Paul Pasturzik, in my absence today, did confer with our town council firm,
Okay.
and it doesn't really need a town meeting, or excuse me, does not need an article. The select board can just establish a committee.
So we can go ahead with the Charter Commission without a warrant. Are you comfortable with that, Paul?
No,
Okay.
because that's not what Dave Martell told me.
He
And this was,
didn't-
and I'm going, this is a year, more than a year ago.
Well, he didn't, and Attorney Martell wasn't in today, so Paul talked to another one of the attorneys in the firm who handles municipal law, and based on an email that I received from Paul, I think the select board can, when it doesn't involve the elected official terms and things like that, can establish a charter review committee on its own.
Do you want to go ahead with the warrant, Paul?
I'd like to place the warrant. If we can pull it, then we can pull it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd just been told otherwise, that we could, in fact, last year, we looked at that to see if we could establish a charter review committee, and even if it was a task force, and then if they came back with recommendations, it would have to actually then be, this is what we were told by council a year ago, because we were actually going to form a task force last year, from the town manager's task force, and we were advised not to, because it would actually have to go to a full committee at that point, which
Do you-
would then need.
Do you want to put a motion on the floor to approve the?
Yeah, I gotta
We'll
find
have to
it.
correct the wording on the, it would be new Article 12 for the establishment of a charter commission.
Do we have any language to be looking at?
Yes, it was in there. We got an email from Stephen. No, I
You
did.
two
I
did,
Maureen and I
yeah,
did.
to review
Oh.
and approve, and then.
Oh, that's
and
just
then
us?
And quite honestly, it didn't get sent out because we wanted to get your review of it, and then,
I just have some wording.
and then,
change on
and
it.
then the advice of council was we didn't need it, so I think it kind of ended there, but
Can you-
certainly.
Can you read that, Paul?
Yeah, how it's stated now is to see if the town will vote to allow the select board to set up a charter review committee for the purposes of providing the town's first comprehensive review of the charter and make recommendations to improve such or take any action relative thereto. I would make a motion that we alter this wording to say, to the warrant article would read, to see if the town will vote to establish a charter review committee for the purposes of providing the town a comprehensive review of the charter, period. We're not asking them to take any actions, it's to make recommendations. That last open-ended sentence kind of sounds like they could do other things besides make recommendations, and so I don't think we need some of that. And it's not allowing the select board to do it, it's the town to do it, because the town meeting vote has to do it.
Is that
Richard?
a committee or a commission that you're requesting?
It's an elected commission that would have to be elected at the
Because I
polls.
think you said committee, that's the reason I was wondering.
No, to see if the town will vote to establish a charter review committee. Well, that's what it's saying, it said committee in the article, it might
Right.
need, it might need to be a commission.
Because there are two different,
So, may I ask a question?
Oh, yes.
I mean, this,
Well-
this feels very sort of rushed, but
Mhm.
the basic question, are we, Paul, this is yours thing. You're proposing that we have another elected committee be created? Is that what the warrant
By
article?
law, it would have to be, we cannot appoint that committee, it would have to be
Okay.
elected, correct?
All right, so here's my comment on this. I mean, this feels like a really big step. I don't think we've really discussed, maybe I'll discuss it before I got here. But I think ordinarily, changes to a charter, it's like our constitution. We have a tradition in this country of not changing the Constitution very often, that we should be hesitant to do that. And I think we should definitely have a lot more discussion about it before we create an elected body. Especially, where, this, something as hastily as this. I mean, and this discussion to me takes place in the backdrop of a proposal, at least during the select board campaign by Mr. Borowski, that we have a mayoral form of government. I mean, I don't know, is that where we're going with this? I mean, if so, I'd like to really carefully consider this question before we before we change our form of government. I think this deserves a lot more deliberation than what we would be giving it.
Actually, I think we should need to go back to a motion on the floor if you.
Okay, I
But-
make the motion to see if the town will vote to establish a charter review committee for the purposes of providing the town a comprehensive review of the charter.
Commission or committee?
I'm saying, I'm sorry.
Can I just clarify? Because it does make a big difference.
Okay.
According to Paul's conversation with the other municipal attorney, and I think this may be where, because I've had the same conversation with Dave, and I think the crux of the confusion is you do the elected commission if you say, for example, want to go from a 5 to 3 member board again, or make it 4-year terms instead of 2 or whatever you guys have now. That's an elected commission. If you want to change if you want to change how many committees the town has and the number of members on a committee, like an appointed board, then you can use a charter review committee. So it's committee versus commission, largely driven by what do you want to accomplish. So
Then I need to clarify something, just for Alex. And Alex, I have been talking about it for about 4 or 5 years, okay, that a review is needed. Because when the charter was put together, it was put together and said, go. You have DPW that was formed from 3 separate bodies: school, maintenance, park and rec, and DPW. There was no consideration for the flow. The school business finance department is still in the schools. It should be over in the town side. So they basically set up a charter, made recommendations, the voters accepted them. The charter review committee or / commission, and it should be a commission, because what we are looking for them to do is do a review of the charter and come back and make recommendations. The only people that can change the charter are the townspeople. The select board can't change it, nor should we.
Right.
Okay, so this is to establish a commission that would go out, review the charter, look at the goods, the good and the bad, the pluses and minuses, and say, geez, after 9 years, everything's working great, or after 9 years, here's the recommendations that we would make to the town. That then has to go, and they have to be elected at a town election, not by us. So I'm looking at a commission because I think they should look at the whole thing, as opposed to, I'm not looking at them just to review the number of committees we have in town. I think we need a charter review, and I've said it for a number of years. It's been 9 years, and the way it was set up kind of hastily, and it was done with a lot of variable, a lot of moving parts in it. And it was supposed to have been a dialogue between all the different boards that were affected by it, and none of that took place. Or very little of it took place when it was established. And I just think that we need to do this, and it has been talked about. And prior to you, absolutely.
We have a motion on the floor.
I'm gonna make my motion, which is to see if the town will vote to establish a charter review commission for the purposes of providing the town a comprehensive review of the charter.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Mark.
Just a question, and that is, since this is an elected commission, I presume that we would not be calling for a special town election
I don't have any interest in doing that.
to do this, so it's probably not going to be started until June, I guess.
Or July, yeah.
Well, and the other thing is there a budget requirement that comes along with this? Does this commission have a budget that they need to, because in the past, our charter commissions have had the ability to travel, to call people, to do things, to hire counsel or consultants, and I'm just wondering if that's going to also be a portion of this. And so I guess I'm wondering if we're not going to do this until a June election, and, that question I have about a budget may not be answered. Is this something we want to look at having on the annual town meeting, since we're not going to be able to take steps toward it before then anyway.
And
Would you have enough time to get the people to nominate for the thing and get the election process going between then and, it seemed like it's a pretty condensed period of time, Mark.
You're right. I mean, I think something I want to look at, but the intent of the town elections is that should any person or group choose to have a referendum on the vote at a town meeting, it could still get on the ballot. And so given the fact that the town election needs to be spaced, and oh, by the way, we help set town elections and the spacing from the town meeting to the town elections, perhaps we ought to keep that in mind this year to do that, especially if it's gotten sufficient advance notice that people will understand that, get your act together because there may be a short period of time. I mean, my expectation is we're not going to have 500 people looking for 5 seats on a
Right.
charter commission, and that's the other thing, that there are details that need to be worked out that aren't in here, like the size of the commission and any of that stuff, which I don't think is necessarily statutory, but we get a chance to set. And last time was set in the article.
And I think the discussion we had last year, and actually the year before that even, was that what was the difference between a committee and a commission? And I thought the board had decided we would go ahead with a committee who would then make decisions on what the commission needed to really look at, and then we never put people on the committee. It
That's
ended up
exactly
being.
what Dave Martell said we could not do. That if somebody was going to come back and make recommendations on the charter, it had to be commission.
But the recommendation then would be if we needed a commission. So between now and the spring, we would have time to, and according to the attorneys, we don't even need to put this in front of town meeting on a warrant. We can decide.
I think they were talking about a committee. I really do. I don't think they were talking about a commission. I mean,
Well-
that would be my guesstimate.
Commission requires the
Do we
town's-
want to,
Yeah.
Charter commission requires the town's approval. That's
Correct.
my understanding, and that's all.
Yeah.
All right, so
Right.
any other questions on this?
Yeah, the only thing I want to say is that if it's delayed till the spring and we say we want to put a warrant on the spring town meeting, all you're doing is making it very difficult. You will have a special election come July instead of in June. And I think that if there's no other time to put this before the voters between now and the spring, we've actually made financial decisions with less information tonight, and whatever reasons why you voted yes or no. It's either needed or it's not. And again, this commission cannot make changes to the charter, the select board can't make changes to the charter, but if you really want a full review, it should be a comprehensive review by a commission to look at the government that we have, and is it effective and efficient? The charter promised a delivery of an effective, efficient government. It wasn't supposed to cost the town any money, and it's done anything, it hasn't even done that. It's cost the town money. And by finance departments not being consolidated, and all of that, again, another document that was produced and a vote that was taken and not followed. So a commission is something to look at where we are and determine whether it's right. If you're willing to do that with the DPW study, then you should be willing to do that with the government.
Okay.
Could I
Yes.
just-
Mhm.
To me, when we talked about making hasty decisions on financial things, I mean, we did make a hasty decision about the traffic lights because there was emergency to it. Changing your form of government, I think by definition, is something that can be considered at length and ought to be considered at
But this doesn't
length.
change the form of government, Alex. That's exactly, you're
But
you're
it's
saying what it
Could I
does.
finish?
No, because you're saying something wrong. It doesn't change it.
No, that's what I'm saying, but you're setting in motion a process that would change the government.
That's your assumption.
Well, okay, that is, I don't know if it's my assumption, to me, it's pretty obvious. And I guess what
Really?
I.
So what are they going to
Excuse me.
change?
I
No,
guess-
don't make
No,
assumptions
you-
and speak for other
No,
members of
okay.
the board.
Could I finish?
Let him finish his
Well,
statement.
state
and
some
then
facts instead of the
you can
fallacy
You
that
can
you have.
object to his statement, but let him finish his statement.
I guess before we start down the path of changing our form of government, I would like to know specifically what it is that's on the agenda for being changed. I'm sure people that want to have this commission have some ideas on that. And again, if we're going toward a mayoral form of government or something else like that, then, we have to be talking about that before we start, building some momentum toward it.
Okay. Paul, did you want to have another comment? Anyone else? Richard?
If there's enough time.
Yes. I'm watching the clock.
There's an inherent process that when you have the charter, they do recommend a periodic review of the charter. It's not that much out of the ordinary, whether you start with a committee and then go to a commission or whatever, you can jump and go to a commission. We're not going to tell a commission what they're going to look at. We're not part of the commission. The commission will be an independent group of who knows who's elected to represent that commission, and they will do like the original commission did, to where they made a recommendation to take this town to a 5-member select board and a strong town manager. They may stick right there, but the process of the review, I don't feel it's contrived to mean anything. It's just part of the healthy process. I mean, this is what they recommend in the charter, that this review take place on a periodic basis, and we've been 9 years. So I don't have the strong emotion that we're perceived going down a line here, and I wouldn't care if it's a commission or a committee at this point, but I think it's reasonable to have our form of government reviewed and to look at how we're doing business and see if there's a better way of doing business.
Thank you. Any other comments? Move the question. All those in favor of endorsing an article on the fall town meeting for a commission, not a committee? Is that, all those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, let's, so is that the end of the additional articles, Stephen? Okay.
If I could, I just want to answer a question Paul had. I looked up at our budget, we have a $50,000 line item for traffic control in this year's budget.
Can I say something about the track? Because I didn't say it before.
I know, I cut
and I'll be
everybody.
very brief.
Yeah.
One of the things that, and I get what I hear apocryphally is that it's for aesthetic reasons. We have post-mounted traffic signals on the corners versus the more standard mast arms that go across the intersection are much better for visibility. And if we ever do get to upgrade our signals to where they should be for safety for both pedestrians and vehicles, they probably would be more likely to be mast arms. You can get decorative mast arms and improve the aesthetics, but that's really the standard now for Mass Highway. Because they're all mounted on the corners and we have some unusual turning radii on our corners, those signals get knocked down periodically and more frequently than I think I would have originally thought of. So our traffic signal budget, we can look at and see what's left, but if during the winter we get a few knocked down, they are expensive to put back up. So that's mostly what that's for.
Oh, I understand what it's for, but, we can also, as Paul said, we could, without this warrant article, we can go and spend money, fix it today, and say, and either go to the reserve, fund with the finance committee, who I hope would support this, or then get a supplemental appropriation to backfill for it. But the repair of that traffic signal should not need to wait a special town meeting warrant approval. That's all I'm saying. There's $50,000 against the $25,000 estimate. That's my only point.
Okay. Right, and so the other item on the agenda that does have a time limit that must be done tonight is the Green Communities completion of the process, and I believe that there's a gentleman here to speak to this.
Yes, I'd invite David Elvine from the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission to help answer if there's any I can certainly speak in mostly general terms about what we're looking at in terms of the last few requirements. We have to fulfill our criteria to be a certified green community under the Commonwealth's program and be eligible for a $125,000 grant to implement energy efficiency and carbon footprint shrinking initiatives. But if it gets into the more detailed nature of metrics and specific technologies and things like that, David has done a really terrific job working with mostly our Department of Public Works and our Finance Department on drilling down into our current energy use and also highlighted some energy efficiency improvements we've already been making. So he can speak in greater detail to those specific things. But basically, the two components that we're asking for approval of tonight are a fuel-efficient vehicle policy. I think it was in the packet 2 weeks ago, and I discussed it a little bit. It does not require you to go out and buy a vehicle now. It just says when you replace non-exempt vehicles, meaning vehicles that aren't used for public safety or, heavier duty pickup trucks or things like that, mostly administrative vehicles, that you purchase a fuel-efficient vehicle that fits with a formula. So there's no immediate cost to doing this, and there only is a long-term benefit because as you know, we pump our own gas, we purchase our gas and pump it ourselves, and so that would help on the fuel side. And then the other part of this is what's called an energy reduction program with certain benchmarks that David can speak to more specifically, but it basically sets forth a series of goals for the town to take aim at to reduce our energy consumption as a standalone merit, but would also have the side benefit of hopefully saving money now. And of course, when you save money in the first year, those savings compound into the future. So I'll defer to the board, or if they want David to give a brief statement.
I just want to clarify, we have to vote on the, both parts, the energy reduction plan, and we have to also vote to adopt the fuel-efficient vehicle plan tonight. So there are 2 votes on.
And if we don't vote tonight, then it would be, we would have to re-enroll next year. The deadline would be October 30th next year, so we miss a 1-year window.
Any questions in regards to the 2 plans we need to vote on?
I just had a quick question. On the fuel-efficient vehicle, now, I understand, I mean, first of all, I think having fuel-efficient cars is a good idea, but and I do understand your point that it's only as you replace the vehicles, you're not having to replace things sort of before necessary. But could you give us an example of just how fuel-efficient the vehicle would have to be? Would you have to go out and buy a Chevy Volt or a Prius, or because oftentimes a fuel-efficient vehicle is cheaper than a larger car. I don't know.
Before we continue, would you like to state your name, where you're from, and tell us a little bit about your background? Because I think you might be the one to answer the question.
Certainly. My name is David Alvin, and I'm a planner with the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. And as Stephen indicated, I've been working with town staff and putting together mainly this energy reduction program, which is a requirement. I'm also involved with the fuel-efficient vehicle policy, which is another requirement of the application. The efficiency requirements are tiered depending on the type of vehicle. So if you're replacing a 2-wheel drive vehicle, the requirement is 29 miles per gallon. And so you can replace that with a conventional car that achieves that mileage, or you could replace it with a hybrid car. The benefit of replacing it with a hybrid car is that you'd be eligible to use the Green Communities money for the difference between a conventional and a hybrid, blue book value. A lot of times you can get used cars at a significant discount to make it work.
Can I just, when you say 29 miles a gallon, is that highway or city? I mean, because it kind of makes a difference.
The formula, it gets a little bit in the weeds with the formula.
Okay.
That's the average number. The formula that's in the policy itself, and the formula comes from our friends at the Department of Energy Resources at the state. They are assuming 43% of the miles will be driven city and 57% will be driven highway. I don't know if that matches the reality of a municipal vehicle doing business around town, but I'm not here to defend the wisdom of the state's formula. This is the program they have.
And this does not include police cars or trucks?
That's right. We're only talking about a dozen vehicles at most in town. All vehicles, DPW vehicles, those that you require, performance for are exempt from this policy.
Yeah, the state guidelines are clear that they acknowledge that they don't make, well, first of all, they don't make fuel efficient, pickup trucks, dump trucks. They don't make fuel efficient interceptor vehicles. So they exempt all of them. And that's really the predominance of our fleet. Now, for example, the police chief's car would be a non-exempt vehicle, and he would be issued a fuel-efficient vehicle in the future, although the vehicle he has now I think would probably fit. But the fire chief's vehicle really is a field command center. Equipment in the back, he pops up the rear hatch, it's an expedition, and he needs that as a command center in the field, so that would continue to be exempt. And we have, just to be specific about it, we have, our town engineer, our water superintendent, our buildings superintendent, and our street crew supervisor. All of them could be issued non-exempt vehicles. They're driving repurposed police vehicles today.
Richard?
I'm
Oh,
sorry. The 29 mile a gallon figure I gave you was for two-wheel drive vehicles. If you determine that you need a non-exempt vehicle that's four-wheel drive, like a Ford Escape or something, the figure for that is 24 miles a gallon. A small pickup truck, the requirement with two-wheel drive, the requirement is 20 miles a gallon. So these are not huge hurdles to get over.
What about if I replace it with a truck that falls outside and I don't have to worry about it? What about if I take a sedan and replace it with a dump truck?
The dump truck would be exempt.
Right. So that is, I don't have to have any sedans if I really don't want sedans. I can just replace it with dump trucks.
Theoretically.
Okay?
Dump
Well,
trucks cost a little more than a
yeah, and
sedan.
some people worry about that.
Any other questions?
I just have a question, and Stephen, I don't know if you looked at this, is that we do repurpose Crown Vics, and I believe there's 3 down at the DPW currently, and we get years out of those as opposed to months. And the question I would ask is, what is the additional cost going to be to the town to purchase those vehicles that we are repurposing that cost the town nothing? Because the gas mileage we're going to save isn't going to make up the difference for a $30,000 car, for example. And I have a concern, and that's why I didn't support this, is that the $125,000 grant is going to cost us that and then some to adhere to it. And that isn't being taken into consideration. Yes, we'll have fuel savings. So there's an offset there. There's some offset, and I don't know how much we drive those particular vehicles. They're not like a plow that, that we're going through in the summertime and wintertime, but there is an offset for fuel savings, but there's also a cost that we don't have currently. So to replace those 3 vehicles, even if you did it once per year, or one a year, those vehicles are going to cost us anywhere between $25,000 and $30,000. That's not in the budget currently. So we're going to have to, there is a cost to adhere to this act, and I don't know if we looked at that. But do you have to replace them all at the same time, or how do you do that?
No, they can be replaced just as you would normally
Okay,
be doing
thank
the
you.
fleet replacement.
To answer your question, and to be honest with you, one of the reasons why this is so close to the deadline was that I got kind of hung up on that point. And I think this would have been a lot easier sell for me if the $125,000 could be used on vehicles for better than going from a regular to a hybrid. Pay for that, but not the vehicle itself. But there are a few things that are there. We spend money currently on energy efficiency improvements in all town buildings. We have a program that's pretty mature. A lot of work has gone into it, and we started to achieve some meaningful savings with those investments. And we have much more work to be done because we have a lot of old buildings. We have a lot of work to be done on that plan. So you could basically transfer funds being used on energy, better thermostats, better lighting controls, LED or CFL light bulbs transitioned over. You could take the money that we're spending on that, apply that to vehicles, and take the 125 from the state and use that. So it could be a net zero or a net positive gain, because the Crown Vics we use now, they go about up to 5,000 miles a year. Just looking at the 3 or 4 we have down at DPW, they average out at about 14 miles per gallon. And so I don't, and I did a crude, back of the envelope payback, and it is somewhat lengthy, but on the other hand, we don't have to buy brand new vehicles. They get used vehicles now, they can get used vehicles in the future. And truthfully, when the Crown Vics they're pretty wore out when we get them anyway, and we do spend some money on them on maintenance to keep them going. But that was my main concern, Paul, but I think in the grand scheme of things, we cannot get the designation and continue to do that. And so they're giving us 125,000 reasons why we should make the switch.
Mark?
Not that it's a one-for-one, but I remember, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, we had a discussion with our police chief who was asking that he somehow get credit, if you will, in his budget for the vehicles that got repurposed that he could have otherwise traded in. And I'm not pretending that we're gonna get a credit or a trade-in value that's the same as, the cost of a new vehicle. But that also ought to be taken into effect if we no longer can repurpose police vehicles to the DPW or the building commission, or whatever it is. We'll start getting some, maybe insignificant, but some trade-in value.
The trade-in is usually, I want to say, last one I heard was $100 to the police, the outfits that, fit up these and sell these cruisers don't want them back there because they're not making Crown Vics anymore. You can sell them at auction for a few $1,000s, and that's something we'll probably, now that we won't, if the policy is adopted, we will now hand them over to the purchasing department, and they will sell them through auction for a few grand. Like I said, they're pretty wore out. And then between hopefully some of that money coming back in and the fuel savings, you get closer to break even. But to some extent, the town meeting spoke and said they wanted this when they adopted both a by right zoning bylaw for siting of
Renewable energy systems.
Yeah, renewable energy systems, and the town meeting also said they wanted it when they adopted the stretch code in the springtime. So we're now at the point where it's kind of a principled vote, and the money isn't so far off that I think it's going to have dramatic negative financial implications, and we're just going to have to be smart about how we replace vehicles and find ways to make it work within the budget.
Any further questions on either of those plans? Okay, do I have a motion to accept the energy reduction plan?
I move we accept the energy reduction plan.
Second.
Any further discussion on the energy reduction plan?
The energy reduction plan is where we talked about the fuel efficient policy, but the energy reduction plan is really just a series of goals. It doesn't really wed us to any particular action at this time. The other thing that's worth noting is the new high school right now is outside of that plan because data from the old high school isn't really germane to the new school, and so you're looking at fiscal year 2012 as a baseline year to measure your 20% gains that you're looking to achieve. The high school, and this high school is loaded with energy efficiency technology, but it is a net higher user of energy because of the equipment and air conditioning and a lot of things that have been added that weren't in the old building. So it's outside of the program for now, and as we get more data on this building, it will be incorporated in down the road.
So you're saying that's our baseline will be
Yeah.
this building?
No, well, the baseline is going to be all other town buildings. The high school is going to be handled separately for the time being.
Okay.
Well, as long as, Stephen, you started the discussion, I think it's important that there's be a follow-up. I was going to do this late in the meeting, but now's an important time. At the school building committee meeting that was held last Thursday, I asked the question that at the joint meeting we had with the school committee, we heard that the cost of energy for this high school was $150,000 a year, more than the cost of the energy for the last high school. And the architect responded, I guess the best word I could say was incredulously, that he said, I find that difficult to understand, even with all it's air blowers instead of steam, it's whiteboards and things like that. $150,000 is a lot of money, and he asked that the town, and I know Paul Pasterzik said he would, send them the actual electric bills to verify whether that number really ought to be followed through as a budgetary line item. He said it may have happened in the month of August when you were running two buildings, or they were starting up this building and running special tests, and lights were burning all night long because there was construction. But I think his bottom line was that $150,000 we heard at the last meeting is subject to some review by them, even to, and Stephen, you were there, even to the point of you saying, if that's the case, we got to look at our models again.
Well,
So,
there was some burn-in with the new light bulbs and a lot of fancy stuff that, I feel like I know a fair amount about project management, but it got over my head with some of the stuff. But I think the big thing is this building is air-conditioned, the previous building was not. And that's a huge driver. That's one of the things our project manager had pointed
I
to.
want to just clarify, the high school is not air-conditioned. The administrative offices are air-conditioned, but the old administrative offices were air-conditioned. They had window units which were inefficient, it was a smaller area, but I don't want anybody to walk away saying the new high school is air-conditioned, it's not.
Right.
It's got, but it does have forced air heat, which requires blowers that are higher energy than a pumping hot water and steam through pipes. But the bottom line is, we're not gonna redesign the high school at this point, but we are gonna, people ought to hear that yeah, that the discussion at the high school building committee suggested that we might not have $150,000 additional cost in energy in this building next year.
You wanted to add something to
Well,
this?
you raise the very points why we're going to be handling the high school separately outside this plan. And the state acknowledges you're going to have replacement buildings, situations just like this. And so it will get this extra level of scrutiny to understand what's going on.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the vote? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Okay. I'd like to have a motion on the floor for the fuel-efficient vehicle policy, adopting it.
I move we adopt the fuel-efficient vehicle policy.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, we've adopted both measures, and we can go ahead and complete the process. Thank you very much for coming in and answering our questions.
Thank you. We'll be submitting the application to the state by October 30th. And shortly after that, there'll be an annual program of where the money can be spent on fuel-efficient measures.
Thank you very much.
Which are also explained in the plan.
And
so
thank you for all the help you put into this.
Glad
Mark?
to do it.
Marie, can I suggest that we have a discussion of how that, and who and how, and I guess why and where, that $125,000 may get considered? We currently have a capital stabilization fund, we have a Chapter 90 fund, but some of that money may go into capital, some of it may go into maintenance. I don't know what it's gonna do, but I think there ought to be an understanding of where, is that $125,000 just go into the general budget to be then allocated for energy efficiency? And I think that we ought to get some recommendations from our town manager and our department heads on how we should handle this year after year, so there isn't, part of the expression, of money grab for $125,000, that we understand where that money may best be going.
Did you want to comment?
The plan does include a series of recommendations that we've identified at the preliminary level already. Some boilers, things that are obviously eligible, air sealing and windows, insulation in certain buildings. So the analysis that we do based on the utility records shows us which buildings are the least efficient per square foot. And so we have a rough idea where to begin targeting that kind of, where we make those investments. But we can also do, PVPC is working with some other towns where there's actually a program to make that money available up to $1,000 to homeowners who submitted applications. So there's a variety of things can be done with the money.
Yeah, and for that reason, I think, if we're gonna change boilers, that goes into our capital planning, but if we're gonna put in weather stripping, that's just maintenance expense, and I think we need to just put together some kind of a plan so we understand. I really do believe that there's, gonna be $500,000 worth of work with $125,000 to pay for it, and we need to get a good agreement on the prioritization of it.
And my understanding is it's, you make recommendations, but the town decides how they're going to use the money.
That's right.
Mhm. Thank you. Any further questions on that issue? All right, thank you again.
Thank you.
I would like to have a motion now to move into executive session to reopen an open session,
So moved.
and we'll need a roll call.
We need to have a purpose.
Oh, to discuss, you're right, for a discussion of
Collective bargaining?
collective bargaining.
Need a second?
I'll second.
Okay. And we'll need a roll call vote?
Yes.
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 And we'll have to go into executive session at this time. I apologize for breaking into the open session to do that, but we will be coming back to open
Do
session.
we have an approximate time when, if people, I don't know if LCTV's planning on televising it?
10 minutes.
10 minutes? All right, we should be back in 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
I'd hope so. Mr. Liassi will wait.
In the packet, in the town manager's report, somewhere. The last page. It is,
It was
no.
under old business for me.
Oh, it's under old business, you're right. It's behind the warrant, under old business. And I don't have much more to add to that, I just briefly, there was a committee before, established back in 2009, looked at the sites for a new DPW facility. I read the report, I thought it was very thorough, and the conclusion seemed to make sense to me. It was a unanimous recommendation. It was presented in executive session, where I think it's still considered a part of, because if it could possibly look at purchasing property that's currently privately owned. And so to move forward, and I agree with Mark, we certainly don't want to hold this process. We want to have a concurrent process of analyzing the DPW as well as looking at facilities, because both things have kind of a timeline that's gonna have to play out. So I think the select board can either accept the recommendations of the site selection committee from before, they can re-impanel the selection committee. There is some membership that is turned over, but they can re-impanel them and ask them to look for new information and come back with an updated recommendation, or the select board can come up with a completely different way to find a site.
Mark?
Yeah, I was on the site selection committee. I may have an advantage over other people on the select board, and certainly I don't even think, Marie, you were on the select board at the time.
No.
So there's only Paul and myself who were even on the select board at the time, but I would suggest that absent different information or different directive, the basis by which the study was done was thorough and comprehensive, and I don't believe that, again, without a different directive or new information, this group reconvened, or any other group, would come up with a different conclusion. It was not, as I say, it wasn't even close when the way they looked at this. Now, one of the arguments that I've heard is we need to relook at the current site. Is the current site viable? I think that was a discussion that led us to our tour that we took by the group of the current site. It ended up also saying, well, do we want to split the DPW and put some operations at a revised current site and some operations at a different site? And, those to me would be the only considerations upon which we'd suggest that the site study committee's recommendation not be accepted. It's a tough call. Do we want to split the DPW, or do we want to ignore the recommendations of tie and bond and still try to build on or rebuild on the current site after what we saw? So I propose that we accept the report of this study commission, unless somebody has a good reason and factual basis for taking another look at the same information.
Hasn't this study already been approved? Wasn't there a vote by the board? I mean, when this thing was originally,
In fact, it was presented in an executive session, and it was not approved, I believe. It was, in fact, not even voted on.
I don't think there was anything to approve. They came back with a document and said, here's your choices. At that time, we weren't ready to proceed with a facility. I would recommend that we adopt adopt it, but just use that study with the one caveat that we also include the current site as to whether or not it's viable and feasible. I believe the tie-in bond study's flawed. It was always geared towards building a new facility somewhere. I think some of the issues that they raised about why we can't put it there, I don't think those are real issues. I think if you want to put it there, if that's the only viable site, we shouldn't throw it out. But I don't think there hasn't been any more land grown in the town of Long Meadow. There hasn't been any other major pieces of land become available where you would site a DPW facility. So I don't know what else they could look at in terms of land use or purchase in the town. So I would keep what we have. I don't think we need to reconvene a site selection committee. I just would suggest to the board that you also make the current site as one of those potential options. Not saying it would fit, but as a potential option, because it was cited that by the person from Tie and Bond, I can't think of his name, that it potentially could be there. It's just there's a cost to that, just as it would be to locate it somewhere else.
And I think that's where the problem with that original task force, just adopting that, in that I would like to see today's numbers, what we're talking about, the cost of each. So, of course, we could build there. What would be the limitations? What would be the cost if we stayed at the current site? Parcel A, if we went there, what would be the cost for not only the site, but also the facility? And what are the pros and cons in having it in Site A, Site B, or C? So I think that the amount of work done by the task force, a follow-up on today's numbers and today's information wouldn't take that much. If you went to the old task force, or if you just pulled together maybe Mark, Walter Gunn, Mike Rabel, the town manager, then we could maybe see what some of those numbers are and what we're talking about, because I don't know what today's numbers would be.
Marie,
Mark?
I suggest we not do current site, Site A, B, alternate A, B, C. The A, B, C alternates have been narrowed down to A. The B, C, D, and E just aren't viable for a variety of reasons. To me, the only options are, what would it cost to develop as best we could, and what would we get, and what would it cost to develop or redevelop our current site, and what would it cost and what we would get to go to the recommended Site A as recommended by the Site Study Committee. To me, that's a modified version of adopting the Site Study Committee. But to start going down 4 or 3 or 4 or 5 paths, I think is really not a good use of the town's resources. There are a number of reasons when we looked at sites B, C, and D that they're just, like I said, when you look at it, the Site Selection Committee came up with, they listed 4 options or 5 options, but the difference between option A and B, C was just immeasurable, and clearly it isn't something that I think the town should put its resources at evaluating. Again, absent some information that we don't know about, and I'm gonna go public with one of the sites, and that is Turner Fields, okay? Turner Fields was evaluated. People should know at home, Turner Fields, it's not a park, it's just town land. We have the right to develop it if we want to, but it's wrong for so many reasons to even think about putting a DPW at Turner Fields. It's wrong from the facilities you can put there, from the location it's there, from the size of this, from what it would cost you to do it. There's wetlands, on and on and on and on. For us to spend any resources reevaluating Turner Fields, to me, would be a mistake, I think. And so that's, and the others that I won't mention are equally as deficient, I think, as Turner Fields were.
Richard?
What type of overview was put on those, Mark, on the proposals? Like, who was this a decision of the group that said they didn't want to go to Turner Field, or was this part of an engineering study?
No, the group did it's called a option, they did an analysis of it, where they looked at and established criteria for a new DPW facility. For example, had to be a certain size.
Mhm.
It had to have certain accessibility. What's the value of the neighborhood it's in. Is it a residential neighborhood? And went through all these criteria, put a value on that, and then ranked them all. So it was a comprehensive decision analysis tree, if you were into, what used to be called KTA or
Right,
Kepner
but
Trio.
there was
that
no
thing.
engineering analysis work done.
No, then on top of that, no, there was a basis, one of those criteria was the engineering cost to develop the site and a few other things. So it was a component, but not a full analysis. So it was a component of that evaluation.
Okay, but I mean, a professional A&E firm did not run proposals like the cost to bring in power in and the soils and everything else.
No,
It was just-
because we ended up at all sites in Long Meadow,
Mhm.
there were none that were, other than, for example, Turner Fields, that, is there a cost of bringing in power? I guess there is, and, especially, but no, there was not a perception that there was any substantial difference in the development cost of the sites necessarily.
Okay, so then it was the group that made up a matrix
Correct.
and you evaluated on what the group felt?
Correct.
Okay. Except for the present site, and that was reviewed by an engineering firm.
Actually, it was the assumption of the group that we would not include the current site in the evaluation. So that was not one of the sites evaluated. But in fact, when you look at it, it was kind of everything was done relative to the current site. So the current site ended up getting an evaluation only because we said, is it better or worse than the current site when you started ranking things? But there was presumption that we'd be moving.
Alex?
I recall, I believe, seeing the document that was produced, Mark, and
Yeah, I think I emailed it to the board.
yeah, there were, you ranked them based on different criteria, sort of like 1 through 4,
Right.
and sort of whatever site had the lowest number, 1. There was something about that didn't seem entirely satisfactory about it. And this is not the amount of work that went into it. I'm sure there was a lot. Because it could be that something's a 1, but maybe it's barely above number 2 on that particular. It didn't sort of measure the intensity of how strong that particular criteria was for each site. And so I came away with it sort of less convinced than maybe the authors of the report would want a reader to be convinced that, this, the conclusion that, is sort of the inescapable conclusion. That left me, and again, maybe there's more to be said that would be convincing of it, but, I think it, a second look, especially with, the passage of time and looking explicitly at the current site, I think would make some sense. I don't think it necessarily would drag things out unnecessarily.
Can I just correct, Alex, what, the process is one where you establish criteria to judge by, and then you rank the relative value of that criteria.
Right.
And then each item gets ranked as to its score, and you actually use multiply the score times the value, so that if accessibility is ranked very high, and one of the other criteria might be developability, or whether you can develop it, might be ranked very low. There is, I think it does take into account just the issue that you were concerned about. They're very close. That in fact, 2 items that may be very close end up being very close because the multiplier doesn't differentiate them. I mean, I'm a firm believer in the process. I think it works. It's a proven NASA-based decision analysis system, not that it makes sense, but I truly don't believe that absent new information, a different group of people are going to come up with a different evaluation. But again, if there's different information that a site wasn't fairly considered, or a site that's available wasn't considered, then we ought to look at it. But I really don't believe that to be the case. And the fact is, the number of sites available or possible in Long Meadow are very, very limited. The study, just so everybody knows, looked at every site in Long Meadow and within, I believe, 2.5 or 3 miles of the perimeter of Long Meadow that had 4.5 acres or more. Every single site we started with. We were down in Enfield, we were in East Long. Turns out we can't go to Enfield, and we can't go to East Long Meadow, we can't go to the city of Springfield. But those were all looked at. So there are no other sites to look at unless something's come on the market recently.
Right.
Richard?
Yeah, I agree with Mark. The value analysis approach was the appropriate approach, and I doubt very much if you convened another committee, you would have any different feelings, because that is a tried and true process, and a lot of agencies do it.
Right.
The
It's
value
rocket
analysis.
science.
Pardon?
It's rocket science.
Yeah, it's rocket
It is.
science, but it is a well-accepted engineering evaluation tool. And I just keep coming back to the fact that we've got to make a decision. We have got to move forward. This thing has been sitting on a dime for too many years. And this is the simplest decision we're going to make. The hardest decision is going to be where, when, how, but it can't even start until we make the decision to move forward.
Before I call you, wanted to say, if we don't go with site committee reestablishment, what is the mechanism this board wants to look at the previous report and see if there's anything they need to update and change, any new information, and also to consider the information on keeping it at the current site? Do you feel we need to do a subcommittee of this select board to look at it and bring that information back? Leave it to the town manager to make a presentation?
I think, can I just weigh in here? Because as the person who's going to be managing the project, I've given this a lot of thought in terms of how best to proceed. I certainly want, it's a big decision in terms of the site. It's going to, whether it's the current site or the recommended site, it's going to be one of the bigger cost drivers at the front end of the project. And there's also going to be, the town meeting will also, if not for funding mechanism or other issues that could come up, the town meeting may also be involved. And so we're going to have to prepare our effort on this for a public audience, essentially, so we can educate the taxpayers in terms of why this is important and why we're making this, recommendations we're making, which are big deal type recommendations. And so I already plan to contrast everything, and also to make sure the recommendations we come up with are things that we believe in and are in the best interests of the taxpayer. So as a MO on this, we are already going to compare everything against the existing facility, because that is obviously, there's no acquisition cost there. I think there are well-documented challenges that will drive costs. And I agree with Paul that the tie-in bond study kind of gives those a 2,000 or 3,000 foot level, not 10, it's closer than 10, but it's still not ground level analysis. So we need to drill down to that further, but the short of it is, I think Richard's right, we're not going to get started as long as we're wondering where we're going to go. And we need to approach a site. There is some due diligence we need to do on whatever site we choose. We will be working on the current site concurrently, if for no other reason that when we present information to either the select board or town meeting or anybody else, it's here's why this site is going to work, here's why the current site won't work, or if we discover the opposite is true, you can present that as well. But I agree with Mark, I read the analysis cold, having no background on it, no horse in the race, no nothing, and their analysis was thorough. It looked at factors that I think are inherent to a Department of Public Works, analyzed them in a very thoughtful way, and it was an overwhelming conclusion. It really, if there was kind of a hair splitting you could do, I would say, we really should I'd be the first person to say, let's take another look at it, because ultimately, I'm gonna have to make a recommendation that I can live by. So I guess I agree with Mark's approach, and I hope I can give the board confidence that it won't be just a myopic tunnel towards the preferred site. It'll be still always looking at current site versus the preferred one, but at least it narrows it down to two things we can move towards.
So your recommendation is that you would make this chart analysis and presentation on the current site and the suggested sites on where we're going to go before the board makes a decision. So the update, instead of a task force, would be done by yourself.
I'm saying that the board, since 4/5 of the board I think was briefed on it previously. If the board feels like recalling the study, they can make a decision, then you can make it tonight, and then I'm just always presenting the 2 sites. If you feel like you'd like to have an executive session and go over the study one more time and review the conclusions, you can certainly do that.
Mark?
I mean, the engineering approach for this is to do exactly what Stephen said, and that is go out and start preparing what I might call a plus or minus 20% cost estimate for doing this. You know, what you're gonna get and what it's gonna cost for option A and for rehabbing the current site. And if rehabbing the current site falls short, then you're gonna have current site plus, you know, for example, we gotta move offices into the community house or wherever we may have to move, you know, so it might be part of the rehabbing the current site isn't straightforward. But I think we need to move forward understanding what we'd get for what costs. And once we understand that, and that can be worked through by, by the town, under the town manager's direction, I don't think the town manager's gonna do it, but under his direction, then we can better say to the townspeople, here's the direction we've chosen, and here's why we've chosen it, and here's why it's the preferred choice. And that will include things like, if it includes, a bond cost, then we got to have in that, are we going to go out and bond it, or how are we going to pay for it? If we're going to say we need to buy land, how we're going to buy the land and acquire the land, or whatever it may be. So I think it's a comprehensive plan that needs to come forward, but we ought to charge the town manager and his staff with going forward and doing that with and I think it's going to take a budget to do it too. I think we're going to have to find some money to do it.
But in just doing this consideration of 2 sites, simply because there are sites that cost may be a factor in site preparation / acquisition, but the thing still has to fit and work in the site. And because I think it is based on the criteria, such a clear picture, I think we can proceed to the next step that Mark is recommending. However, I'll defer to the board on what they'd like to do.
Paul?
Yeah, the decision's pretty simple, and I don't think, the study did look at it, but the study came back was, it's either going to be building on the current DPW site, or we're going to either take a piece of land by eminent domain / negotiation. That's it. It's one of 2 choices. And the preferred site isn't necessarily, I would say, the best site, because there's other sites that you could still take by eminent domain / negotiations that might fit better. But I think this board should have an executive session to understand, because one's financial, which is build on the current site, the other one's political, which is taking property or negotiating, and that's a political thing that we're gonna have to say, yes, we're behind. And I just think that the analysis is gonna have to be done by the town manager. And I think that the choices are just 1 or 2. Build where we are or eminent domain. And then if we say to the town manager, okay, we understand the ramifications, go there, do your analysis and come back to us, and we get to weigh it out. And because until, it's not a matter of whether it's the current site is the best, cheapest site. It's the best, cheapest site versus, and one site was more preferable because of aesthetic, more aesthetic type reasons than anything else, and there were other sites considered, but you're taking, it's the rest of it, other than the current site, is eminent domain or negotiation, and that's a political will or battle that the board would have to have. But I just think that if you have executive session, understand what each of those encompasses, and let the town manager come back with that analysis of which 2, again, if you're going to use the current site as the baseline, then we're going to have a choice to bring forward to town meeting, and I think that's the only way that you can do it.
So we're going to task the town manager to create this analysis, and we present it to us in executive session, so the board can make a decision on what it needs to do, and executive session is allowable, considering we're discussing possible purchase of property. And how soon would that be a reasonable time frame for us to look at, Stephen?
I guess I'm confused in terms of what analysis you're asking for versus what was in the site selection analysis that was already done. I mean, I think that was...
Well, I think we're talking...
Perhaps can I make a recommendation? Perhaps we have an executive session, review the report again, so it's fresh in everybody's head, And then if there's further analysis needed from there, a directive can be issued at that time.
I guess I don't know that it makes that much difference whether we go into executive session at some point and review the study some more, because it's not going to change what we ask you to do, I don't believe. You know, I think there's a level of, or in this case, a lack of level or of detail that we're asking for a evaluation of two different sites. And I think we need some level of understanding. You're right, Paul, in addition to the political issue, should it come down to non-town land that gets involved in this. But part of whether you're willing to fight the political fight is, what's the benefit you're going to get by fighting the political fight, if you think it's that, as opposed to, you know, we got two projects and they're about the same. And oh, by the way, on top of one of the options is a political, oh, why should we do it if there's, but, so, you know, if one's gonna cost us $5 million and one's gonna cost us $500 million, you know, so knowing some of those relative parameters will help, I think, the select board in determining whether, if there's a political issue, whether, how much to go after it and really what you're up against, but more importantly, helping us eventually with the citizens of Longmeadow understand, here's the benefits of fighting this political issue. And so I don't think we need to go back and look at it. I think we tell the town manager, you go ask the finance committees for some reserve funds to do some engineering studies, get this thing down to a plus or minus, you know, 15% analysis of these things, and let's come back and talk about it in detail.
Yeah, I want to know what's going to cost between the two sites, and then I think
Well, we're just talking about two sites. We're talking about current site and then the preferred site from the site selection recommendation. Site selection,
and
task force
any other
recommendation.
site that you think is viable
I think
after
that's-
reading the report.
But I don't think, but then I think you're back to the site selection task force role again. And I think what we're trying to do is settle on the recommendation, or I guess we're saying do something completely different. And it's fine to do that, because that was one of the options I said in my report. It's just gonna cost more and take longer to do that. So I guess I'm still a little confused. If the directive is, take the recommended site from the task force, and take the current site and hire some consultants and do some preliminary design and drill down into what we think the development of the building would be. I mean, that process by itself takes months.
Yeah.
But I think it's fine. I think that is the next step in sort of pursuing this, to be sure. But if you add 3 or 4 more sites to do this, it is gonna greatly expand the cost. And so I guess I'd like, before we do that, perhaps some further direction on, you know, you wanna limit the number of sites you're studying, and since they all were studied, you know, I guess, do we wanna look at all the sites or just the 2? Can I get some clear sense on that?
I would just recommend, I would agree with Stephen, I think it would be best if we went into an executive session. 2 weeks isn't gonna make the biggest difference in the world. And I think that if we have that report in front of us again, to talk about it, so that we all understand the exact same thing, because, you know, I don't know how, the last time someone's looked at it and so, in detail, but I just think there is a finite number of properties. Some were summarily dismissed because of location, size, and so forth. And I think one of the parameters that we had for the group was the, you know, minimal impact on neighborhoods, for example. So I think we just need to review those. I don't know, 6 or 7 properties, 8?
Yeah, it wasn't that many.
So
You're
it's
right.
not like, you know, there's some we can automatically dismiss, but I just think that it would be better to sit down in executive
Englewood
session.
Edgewood.
Edgewood Avenue. I got a double lot, sure, you can put it in the back.
Why don't we-
Fix up the garage, but I.
Okay, we will look at the next executive session to review the report and to finalize the directive to the town manager. We are not looking to reestablish the site committee. We're moving forward to a directive to the town manager to analyze 1, 2, 3, depending on what we decide on the next executive session, which I think would be valuable because that way, this is the first time the whole board has sat down and had a full discussion on that study anyways.
Yeah, Alex, I'd be glad to answer any questions just offline that you may have.
Sure.
Yeah, certainly if you want to come to the office and I can pull the study out and we can go over it, sure.
All right, so let's move on down to new business on the Hampden County Retirement Board. Mark, do you want to give us a little update on that?
Sure. It's come to our attention that there is an opening on the Hampden County Retirement, well, I'm not sure an opening, but the Hampden County Retirement Board is having elections for board members. Given the discussions we've had about the impact of retirement costs, retiree benefits on the town of Long Meadow, I would like to recommend that we encourage our town manager and/or his delegee to seek election for the Hampden County Retirement Board. I think there's a value in us having some input into it, given our financial responsibilities to
Is that a motion?
our employees. I'll be glad to make it in terms of motion. I move that we ask that our town manager represent the town of Long Meadow by running for the Hampden County Retirement Board of Directors.
Second.
Any discussion?
The only question I have is, are you eligible for that in the sense of violating anything, running for election or something?
I think, I have not checked with the ICMA. I did check internally. I certainly am I am eligible to serve on the Hampden County Retirement Board. In terms of the ethics of my professional association, I haven't checked. I thought we'd get this step.
Can I just ask one other question? I would, well, not question, but I would suggest to the board that we get a list of everybody who participates in that election, I don't know who it is, and lobby for Stephen to be appointed. I think that we are being disserved by the Hampden County Retirement Board for this town. It's almost like a secret club that you have no access. I know you can go to meetings, but you have no input on it. And they just hand down directives, and even though everything went to prim and prit, their executive costs, costs to run the Hampden County Retirement are still somewhat high. And I would love to see some sort of control on that. So I would like to find out who else is involved. I don't know who elects who, and I don't know if there's some club you have to join.
Well, if I can, I actually stopped into the Hampden County Retirement Board the other day to ask them, because I was originally thinking that somebody on the select board should run, but in fact, we're not eligible. You have to be somebody who participates in the Hampden County Retirement Board plan, but cannot be a current recipient of retiree benefits. So essentially, you've got to be a current employee. You can't be, and I know we are employees of the town, and I think if I challenged them, we might in fact be able to participate, but I wasn't in a position to challenge at the time. But clearly,
are you enrollees?
Yeah.
You guys, you get your...
I don't believe we're,
In Hampden County Retirement? Check your paycheck.
Oprah? Is that Oprah?
No, it says Hampden County Retirement on it.
Oh.
It's like $40, you get about $40 a year now, you'll be all set, only at 65.
Alex?
Now, Stephen, is this something that you want to do, or would it be more appropriate for somebody else, another? The reason why I ask is, I mean, you're getting directives all the time from us, right? And, I mean, I think we should be sensitive about how much, we're asking Stephen to do, and, is this realistic? And, I mean, it's just a question to you.
I appreciate you asking, Alex. I would say, in terms of the importance of issues that I deal with, all directives, are all directives equal? Maybe not. But in my professional judgment, there are certain things that are my responsibility that are of greater import to the taxpayer or greater impact to the taxpayer. We talk all the time here about pension costs, retiree costs.
Right.
This is something that we are not represented on the board. This board is extremely concerned about it, and I feel like for me to be able to have something to report or do for the board, other than it's out of our control, it's at the retirement board, would be good. I did actually, when I saw the notice of the election, I had already talked about internally, almost simultaneously, that Mark was looking at it as well. So I had already kind of started the process of finding out if this is something that I could do, should I do, and receive good feedback from our treasurer as well as the CFO. I asked the CFO if he would like to do it. It is additional meetings and some additional responsibility, and he felt that I'd be a better fit for it.
Well, but more importantly, I think if you look at the other members of that board, they are town administrators and town managers rather
Yeah.
than CFOs. So I thought,
Okay.
but the motion is worded, you or a designee, because we want to give you the option of getting somebody from the town who's appropriate.
Any further questions or discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay.
The kickoff rally will be next week.
Okay, we have a little bit of time before, I'll go straight to the town manager reports, but I wanted to bring up this joint policy subcommittee I was thinking of forming. From the meeting that we had with the school committee, I think, Mark, you began an interesting discussion in regards to OPEB and negotiations and where we were going with that. And I started to think maybe we need to put together a joint policy subcommittee. But then Richard and I attended a finance committee, I'm not sure what it was called, committees from across Massachusetts, and they said one of the really important things to pull together a strong budget is to get a set of financial policies together, and it really should be jointly, school committee, finance committee, select board should be sitting down, and everyone should have a say in it and have a skin in the game and all agree to these set financial policies. So I think these two things are coming together to the idea of having the joint policy subcommittee, and I was wondering how the board felt about that.
Can you just talk a little bit more about what the outcome of, I mean, you say financial policies, and I guess I'm not quite sure what falls into that category.
Well, I'm not too sure either. I've been going through some of theirs. Part of the GFOA is you're supposed to have a set of financial policies. And part of that could be that you want to fund OPEB by a certain year, that you want to have your pensions funded to a certain year, that you want to make an effort not to use free cash for operational expenses. That would be deciding together what would make a strong financial health for the town, and then those are goals that everyone works together as they sit down and do the budget. So instead of us just looking at the town side, the school side, we're looking at really what's the best for the health of the town, and maybe having some benchmarks that you're reaching for, and what are those benchmarks, and how we could get there. One of the ways they said that you develop some of these policies is you often look at what Moody's is looking for in order to increase your credit rating, what GFOA is looking for, the top measures for what they consider a very healthy town budget. Then we sit down with the finance committee, the school committee, and we all agree that this is a benchmark or a goal that we're going to be reaching for, or a policy that we want to try to bring our budgets in within the parameters. Then the discussions would be, if we really have this goal of funding our OPEB by a certain date, how we're going to get there. It could be we sit down to negotiations that we have to consider this, or when we do look at our increase of salaries, what does that really mean to the pension and the OPEB liabilities? So it starts the conversation.
I like the idea of us trying to work more with the school committee. It really seems like there's a little bit of a disconnect sometimes between our discussions and theirs. This idea, though, sounds vaguely familiar to me, and again, maybe this is where Paul or Mark might be able to weigh in more. I recall a number of years ago in the 07-08 time period, there was something called the Budget Strategies Committee. I might be getting the word wrong, but the idea was that it was joint. There's a joint committee to work on sort of budget direction, and then that sort of, there seemed to be hurt feelings and upset, and I recall Mr. Schiavelli was on it, and I think he was dissatisfied the way it worked. But I mean, you know, and it feels like since that time, that sort of broke off, and then the idea of sort of working with the finance committee and the school committee sort of broke off as well. So I don't know if, you know, how exactly this committee would, you know, structure its work. You know, that's probably a work in progress, but I like the idea of us trying to work together.
Richard?
I wonder if this is going to be a natural byproduct of the GFOA process, once it comes in and fully implements. If that's just going to be I understand where you're at, Marie, because it was very evident that's what they did. But we're unable to find out if that's going to be a natural process that comes out of this. That's just going to happen. Now, I was more concerned on where we were going with GFOA, and what type of implementation schedule we have, and who was actually taking the charge, and if we had a matrix up now for implementation, and the marriage between, I guess, finance committee and town manager and the select board on the overview of this process as we move forward. And I meant to ask you that by email, because I'm not sure where we're going on that. I know we said we're going to go, but I don't think we worked out the details. Did you have any details, Stephen?
No, we were given a directive to prepare the budget in accordance with the 14 GFOA guidelines that we're doing.
Right.
That's our job.
Okay.
And Paul and Officer and I are doing that.
Okay.
And I know he's keeping the finance committee informed of that effort, but it really is a presentation thing. And in fact, I think Paul does have a matrix of things that are a part of that we're working internally.
Okay, but there's a lot more to that process than just the presentation aspect. There's the inherent.
Not in the directive, though.
Well, I mean, no, with the GFOA, there's a lot more to it than just presentation.
Yeah, I mean, GFOA is more than, GFOA is the Government Finance Officers Association, so we use this shorthand for, you know, accounting, budgeting, things like that. What the select board adopted was for budgeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's other stuff you can do with accounting, but we definitely are looking at budgeting
Right.
first.
But what Marie was just talking about are aspects of GFOA. These are other decisions that are made that become an inherent part of that process.
It can, and or it doesn't have to. So as I understand, some towns take certain aspects of the way the budget is presented. I know Mark was questioning whether what we have adopted would just be a presentation model, or is it really going to make a difference in measurement? And I think it really depends on what we do want to implement, what you're going to put into it to see what it comes out. And it's going to take many years to really get to a level where all of the parts of what can be used, the tools that can be used. This is just one tool which I think we had started to naturally roll towards. And then when I heard that this weekend, I thought, well, that's very interesting, because it is a way for us to sit down and really start discussing what we feel the parameters of a healthy budget are.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, City Stat's going to be coming in on top of it, too.
Yeah.
So that's another part that's going to come in on top. That's why I say, I think there's an inherent shakedown when all these programs start to converge, that these programs are just going to spin off to necessity. Because it's going to be so obvious to everyone that, hey, we need to do something. I may be wrong, but I just got a feeling that these things are going to shake out as we start to move forward with this, especially when we get the City Stat overlapping with the GFOA.
Yeah. Mark?
Yeah, just comments about the proposal for joint policy subcommittee and a joint policy subcommittee with the school with the school committee. First of all, I want to make sure that we had some kind of a purpose behind the discussions, because sitting in a room and spending precious time that none of us have discussing joint policies that neither side wants to adopt isn't my idea of a fun way to spend the evening. And so, you know, there needs to be a commitment that the select board's going to look hard at what comes up, and similarly that the school committee's going to look hard at what comes up. You know, clearly there's no guarantees that we're going to go through this, but more importantly, I think there's the question of, you know, who and why and how do we bring other people beside the select board into the budget process. And Alex somewhat brought into this that the old process that was budget strategy committee and joint budget committees. You know, we tried a bunch of things in the past, and they seemed to work, but they mostly didn't work. And the reason being, in my opinion, that ultimately the responsibility for the budget is ours. and other people have a great time saying you should do this and you should do that, but it always comes down to you should do it instead of we should do it or we're willing to do it. And so I think ultimately, I hate to be the glass is half empty kind of guy, but the responsibility for preparing the budget is the select boards, and we can bring in anybody we want to consult with them and to pick their brain and get their ideas, but ultimately, we're the ones who have to adopt the policies, and we're the ones who have to implement the budgets. I understand the school committee does also, but, I want to make sure that going into this, there was an agreement that it was a joint effort.
Any other comments? Yes.
We adopted GFOA. One of the questions I asked Ned Steiger was, what would compel the school committee to comply with GFOA? And they have another acronym. I don't know if it was ASAC or something like that.
ASBO.
Pardon?
ASBO.
Okay, there you go. I like to see that first. I'm not a believer that, as a member of the Joint Strategies, whatever that was, the Budget Strategies Task Force, it was nothing but an override committee, and after the first year override was done, it was never met again. No minutes were taken, no votes, and that type of thing. And Mr. Chiavelli was actually in favor of it on the outcome because he supported it. I was against it. What it
The
proposed.
override.
What it was proposing and what was supposedly the long-term budget strategy, which was never materialized. So I have always been of the opinion that our job is to run the town and run the budget and that type of thing, and when I don't believe that discussions are meaningless. I think that, if we want to have the school committee in for another discussion to talk about the impacts on their budget and what they really see coming down the road, I think that's wonderful. But to have a joint policy subcommittee that's going to define what this board is going to do, I'm not a fan of subcommittees to begin with, and having one with two committees that don't have the same objectives we do. We answer to the voters for the tax rate, not the school committee, not the finance committee. I've been doing this for 8 years on this board, and I've never seen once where this board has put in opposition to anybody coming to us and speaking about their budget, about the budget. Not the finance committee, not the school committee. We've never shut the door and said, you can't come in and talk about it. And to have a joint committee is just saying that, you're going to force a discussion which isn't necessarily going to be productive. So I'd like to see the GFOA work, see if ASBO is something that the schools adopt. I think that would be wonderful. That puts us on the same page in terms of reporting. I think then you're actually having better discussions because you're saying the same numbers. You're not having what's going to Department of Revenue versus Department of Education.
I support having the joint policy committee, and that's why I brought it forward. ASBO, the GFOA, what we've adopted, is a format. And a lot of ASBO, the schools already do. They are sitting down and they're discussing whether they're going to go into the full format or not. But that doesn't preclude us from sitting down and talking about basic financial policy, where we want to be, long-term budgeting, and what we feel is really good for the health of the town. So I asking for the support on the Joint Policy Subcommittee. If you sat down and you tried to have these discussions in the past, it doesn't mean you sit down and you don't try to have discussions again. One of the things that was emphasized by, I believe, the town administrator from Dedham, he said, until you have all the stakeholders sitting in the room having a full discussion on the basic elements of a healthy budget, you will not have everyone agreeing, and you won't stop the problems on town meeting floor. Once we had those discussions and everyone started to come together and understand the importance of the basic outlines of a healthy budget, then the problems and the antagonism started to fall back and everyone started to work together. So I strongly feel this is a very important first step, and it might fail, we might try, and we're unable to talk. Well, that doesn't mean next year we don't sit down and try again. So I'm going to, any other?
Give me a further definition of what you want, though.
What I want is for the school committee and the select board to sit down and go over the financial policies that we must establish according to GFOA in order to, I'm not sure what, that's one of the 14 criteria, and for us to sit down and to discuss what those points are before we go into it. Now, I'm not saying they're voting on it. That's something that this select board votes and makes the decision on, but we're having input and we're listening and we're trying to come to a consensus. And it very well could be we're going to discuss the meaning of the word "the." Or it might be that everyone agrees and says, no, it really makes sense that we're going to try not to use free cash for operational expenses. But we need to start having that discussion as a town, and then we can move forward. If we take these new financial policies that we haven't had before, and we just say, here they are, and we slap them on top of everyone else who's working on the budget, I think we'll have more turmoil, and it'll take longer for us to get where we need to go. So that's what I'm hoping of. So you're saying the mission of this group is very limited, and that is to work on that policy page that we're looking to develop through our side of GFOA, and they might have it in another form. They might be ASBO, they might be another type of, but they also need to have financial policies. A lot of it just hasn't been written in town. It's just what we've been going on what's tradition.
Now, I assume, since it's a joint subcommittee, that if the school committee decided that they didn't want to send members, that'd be the end of it.
That would be
Okay.
end of it. We'd
So-
probably sit and we'd talk to the finance committee as we're going through the policies, because
Okay.
they are developing them right now. I understood that's one of the things that Paul Pasturgic's supposed to be working on.
So really, this, the motion to establish this is really sort of an attempt. I mean, on our own, we could not establish this joint subcommittee.
Yeah.
It's really sort of a motion to make an overture. To
Yes.
establish it with these other
Mhm.
committees in town.
I mean, technically, our subcommittee we probably should have one anyways, that sits down and starts working on these to present to the board. So if the school committee decides not to go forward, I would still say we would sit down and discuss these policies that are being implemented or with the finance committee moving forward. But I would be very surprised if the school committee didn't want to be sitting at that table also with us.
Can I ask a couple things?
Mhm.
I just heard that the finance committee is working on financial policies for the town. And I'm asking Stephen this, was this something that is operating in the vacuum? Did you know about that they're working on financial policies that we would technically have to adopt and we don't know about it?
I don't know if I describe it that way, and Paul Pasturgic is better suited to speak to that. I mean, he staffs the finance committee. I think it's providing fiscal or financial, depending on how you look at it, financial policy recommendations, which I think is the finance committee's role, which is how the select board adopted GFOA budgeting practices a few months ago. I mean, it's a similar type thing. And I know the finance committee is very good about looking at what's out there for municipal finance and beyond, and trying to find ways to, do the financial reporting more effectively. And that's a goal I think we all share. And, I think as a general comment, I think this stuff is important to facilitate communication. Like, the joint policy committee sounds like an extension of the joint committee meeting that we had last week, which, to me, I perceive that some of the members of the school committee that are less tenured, really, it was a really an educational, moment for them. And to me, that was good that you could see that learning process happening. And I think that's where I think it benefited both sides of the budget writing, bodies there. And, I think it's important to have that communication open, because none of this expands the size of the pie or really changes the political pressures that go into how it's sliced.
And I don't disagree with you, but these meetings are open to the public. It's open to put an agenda item to invite the school committee in.
Mhm.
What I actually think you're doing is putting the cart before the horse, because we haven't established financial policies. And to have a subcommittee sit with the school committee to establish financial policies that we would then adopt, I think we need to adopt financial policies first, and then bring them to the school committee and say, because it's not up to the school committee to address OPEB or the pension liability or anything like that. I think we need to adopt it and then get agreement on that, what we want to do with it. Because if this board hasn't even talked about a funding date for OPEB, a fully funded date for the pension, then how are we going to bring that to a subcommittee when we haven't even had that discussion yet? And I think we need to, I don't disagree with you, those policies need to be on the agenda and discussed, but to have that discussion in a subcommittee with members of the school committee, without us having that discussion first, I think is the other, it should be the other way around.
Any other discussions on the motion?
If I could,
Yeah.
I think the concept is a great concept. I think where it falls short is that finding a subset of either committee that will fairly represent the entire committee to a point that we know that we've got a done deal. It's not the same as a, joint Senate House Conference Committee that's forced in to come up with a compromise of the bill. And what we find is that however many people sit in this committee may do an awful lot of work and find it's for naught, or it's for limited responsibility. And I think, Stephen, your comments were quite interesting, and I agree with you that the joint committee meetings we had last week were, I think, eye-opening, maybe the good word to use for some of the people on both of the committees. But my fear is that those are the people who aren't going to be on the subcommittee and lose the benefit of that eye-opener. And certainly not everybody's going to be able to be on it. I mean, I might think we're better off served having issues for the school committee and select board looking at single topic discussions on what should the town be doing about OPEB or funding in a pension plan, and sit down and put aside an hour and a half some evening to talk about that as a means of gaining better understanding. And maybe we even do 2 topics in a night, so that we get better understanding on both sides of what the key issues are. But none of these issues have clear-cut solutions, and I don't believe that a subcommittee is going to be able to develop them to where they're adopted.
Okay, any other comments on the,
I'd like to make a comment, Marie, that there's been a significant amount of discussion take place. I'd like to see you withdraw your motion, let us talk more about this before we put it up to a vote. I think there's a couple of things that were mentioned that it would likely be fair to get resolution on, to let all board members feel at ease before we push a vote on it.
okay. It wasn't my motion.
Excuse me, I thought you had brought it.
I had asked for a motion, and I think Alex moved, so are you willing to
Okay, then I'd-
table the motion?
Is-
Was it Alex?
I forgot, do we have a?
I don't see one.
There's
Oh.
No, we
motion.
don't.
There was no
Oh, I
motion.
thought there was a
no-
motion.
All right.
Okay. All right, so we will continue the
Could we
conversation
table the
on it.
discussion then?
Yeah, we'll table the
Okay.
discussion to the next meeting.
Right, and I think there's value to this. I think there's a lot of value to it, but there's some valid points that have been brought up. I think we need to have a resolution on first.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right,
Thank-
we'll move on then. And I wanted to jump down to town manager reports, because I did want to end early for our town manager tonight.
10 being early.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Really, very briefly, in addition to the Bliss Courts report that I had hoped to generate for you for this packet, as well as a report on water main flushing, I had technical difficulties last week, and so that's why I didn't have my own memo in the report as well. So I understand how you feel, Richard, about computer stuff. Middle of the week, I lost a couple of days, and
Dog ate your homework?
well, I kept trying to. The computer just was working slow, and
Yeah.
dog ate the homework.
Yeah.
And I found that really a lot more disruptive than if you'd said what would happen if your computer went down. I wouldn't think it would be that disruptive,
Right.
because all the stuff I need to produce documents is sitting there.
Right, it is
So,
disruptive.
and I don't mean to make excuses. The packet is obviously does not have in it what I'd like to have in it. Just want to give a brief update on, we did meet, a delegation from the police department and the fire department went up to Devon's to look at their regional dispatch center. Really a great visit, really illustrative. Answered a lot of questions, really, I think, affirmed really the merits of pursuing this idea. I think we are on a pretty long timeline on this. I wouldn't say this is a front burner issue, but we're going to keep meeting and keep seeing how things evolve, because all the things we felt like were benefits about it intuitively, the folks in Devon's affirmed and highlighted some benefits we didn't even think of. So just want to let you know that we did have that meeting, and we will continue the discussion, but this isn't every other week you'll be seeing about it. Merriweather, I'm sure if you've been out there, the water and sewer work was completed on Merriweather. The people who were on temporary water mains were off. I think that's over a week ago that they were put back on regular mains. The project was graded, and base coat of pavement was put on, which will be there for the winter. The road will settle over the winter, and then the final coat of paving will be done in the springtime. They are now moving down William Street to install, I think they're now getting to the part where they're doing 36-inch pipe. At some point in time, in the next couple of weeks, they will be hitting Woodside, getting even with Woodside, and then they'll turn and cross over William Street, and then continue down Woodside. The original project completion date was mid-October. We are a few weeks behind, so I would say first 2 weeks of November will not be the completion date. One of the things that they've done as they went along, as we saw in Merriweather, is rather than just keep excavating trenches all the way down and then go all the way back to the beginning of the project to do grading and binder coat and loam and seed, they've done that. They've kind of closed out segments of the project, which is, I think, a big issue that we had on Maple Road last year, was all the water and sewer services got put in, and then they didn't get done in time for the winter to patching the areas back up. We've learned from that episode, and as you can see, Merriweather's been put for the most part back together. The project has gone a lot more smoothly of late, and like I said, a few weeks behind, but it's looking like they'll be done certainly before winter time. There is also Barrington and Chestnut. There's a water mains, another project that's been authorized. That's a project is going to they're going to get started, I think, in the next couple of weeks. It's a project that they can do 2 weeks worth of work and then stop and backfill for the winter time. It's not a project where they have to tie in and get a drainage line done like Merriweather, so we can segment the work. And so they'll work until on or about November 15th, when we're going to institute our winter shutdown. And so and we've asked them to start at the far end away from Long Meadow Street, so we're not working on Long Meadow Street and risk having Long Meadow Street torn up for the winter time. So and then are you going to talk about consultants for the casinos in the subcommittee report?
Why don't you go ahead and finish the report?
Okay,
And then Paul can fill in.
Okay, so briefly, I've had, when we're talking about looking at mitigating casino impacts, just as a general comment, it's incumbent on me as town manager and the organization to make sure we're prepared for for the probability that the casino would come to Springfield. If it doesn't, so be it, but we have to prepare as if it's going to, which means we need to prepare to negotiate the best possible agreement we can with the town. And under the law, the agreement is to mitigate impacts, and it asks surrounding communities, or compels surrounding communities to assess impacts that can be measured, or that are measurable. So things like traffic, we've talked a lot about here, issues of public safety, we've talked about a whole range of things, and we're starting to focus in on the areas that we feel are the greatest area of impact, but we want to make sure that we are not missing something simply because nobody really has any experience doing this kind of thing as a surrounding community. And so we've had one call, the attorneys and I had a conference call with one consultant who can provide some other types of economic or public safety impacts, and we also have a call on Tuesday. So at the upcoming meeting, we'll report on what we think other appropriate consultancies that may need to get involved are, and possibly none. We may be okay with what we have, or with what we proposed so far.
Paul, did you want to add anything to that from the subcommittee?
I'd like to, if we could take that in order. Before I go there, I just had a question about Why would we start a project on Barrington and then shut it down in 2 weeks? When you never know if you're gonna have one of those uh-oh moments because we can't see anything underground. And, I mean, isn't there a far greater risk of getting 2 weeks' worth of work in than there is waiting for the springtime when we can do the whole thing at once? And if we have my only thing is if we have a nightmare in that first patch that we dig up, we're not gonna be prepared for it because the winter shutdown's 2 weeks later.
Well, it's the nature, and believe me, I was asking that line of questioning in our meeting with the town engineer. And then where they're excavating, the nature, it's just a water main replacement. They're not disconnecting the existing water main, and they won't until they're done. Basically, it's, a couple hundred linear feet a day that they can do, a main that they can install, and every, it's a 2,000 foot, linear feet of main project. And so every day you can knock off this winter, are days that you save and that work will be done in the springtime. We have a big project on Laurel Street that we put off until springtime. It was interesting getting that started, and we put it off saying, we wanted, because it's the same contractor as Merriweather, and we want to make sure we have that being the focus. The problem is now, there's going to be work possibly on Long Meadow Street and Laurel Street at possibly the same time, because the Cooley Brook culvert is a state project that may be going on, and we always want to be conscientious of getting as much work done as soon as possible, so the work doesn't interfere with each other. That's the only interest, like I said.
But our guys aren't doing the work, correct? So
Correct, it's a contract.
Right, so the 2 weeks that we save this year doesn't really matter for us.
But the contractor's doing other work for the town as well.
Well, that's my other question, is,
Yeah.
isn't that an issue then, you're having the contract to go from one project to the other?
Yes and no. I mean, it's an issue. It really is a function of our procurement, the state's procurement process. There's nothing in the procurement process that prevents you from doing that, and you can't really reject somebody for bidding on multiple work.
No, I understand that, but we can say, no, you're not gonna start a project unless you can complete it, and obviously they cannot, we know that going in, that Barrington cannot be completed to its fullest, and I don't see the prudence in that. I think it's actually, I think you're taking far more risk in waiting a whole winter to get back to a project. Whether the contractor goes belly up or something, you never know, but I think that's an issue that there's always risk to doing that, and I think I don't see the reward for the town, because the folks on Barrington are going to be displaced for that whole project when it resumes in the springtime.
There are parts of it on Chestnut that can be done, kind of out of the way. And like I said, I agree with you. It is a risk reward proposition. That's the exact words I used discussing it. And I think, like I said, if we have favorable weather this fall yet, it's possible you could extend the winter shutdown if it looks like the weather's gonna be nice all through Thanksgiving, and get more of the project done. The contractor and we want to get the jobs done as soon as possible, so the inconvenience to folks is not stretched out months and months and months. And not every job is the same, and so the nature of this work makes the risk lower than, say, Merriweather or than it was on Maple Road. But you're right, and the rewards are just more time for, the sooner they get done with this, the faster they can get to Laurel Street, and it reduces the chances of a conflict with work on Laurel and work on Long Meadow. I mean, that really is, we're all kind of working back from not having those two roads potentially closed at the same time.
My understanding was that the only source of pavement in this area is Palmer Paving in East Springfield, up in Indian Orchard section, and that they close November 1st. They have a hard close date, and they don't change it for anybody. I could very well be wrong, but can you ask the contractor on behalf of the town for some assurances that both William Street, where they cross, Wilkins or whatever roads there are, and Barrington and Chestnut have asphalt on them for the winter time, so that we're not plowing dirt
Oh, no, that's gonna be, those jobs are gonna be done by the winter shutdown.
I understand they're gonna be done, but if it's November 15th, unless Palmer Paving has agreed to extend the runtime of their plant, there may not be asphalt available, which is what we ran into last year. And they had to go some long distance, and they ended up getting, you know, a 16th of an inch of pavement instead of what they really needed, because they ran beyond what the paving plan. And I'm not questioning you, I'm just saying we ought to get assurances that it will be paved to the same standards it will be paved to the same standards on November 15th or December 1st if the weather is beneficial, or January 15th if the weather is really good, as it would be if they ended the project on June 15th, because we may have favorable weather on Barrington and Chestnut, but if we leave that as a dirt road for the wintertime with then snow and rain in the spring, we're gonna have a bunch of unhappy
I completely agree.
residents. And so, you know, and this gets back to materials and methods. Can we tell the contractor how we want this road left for the wintertime? I think we ought to be able to, but it's my opinion, not necessarily, you know, the definitive opinion of the project, but I think that'd be a problem. The only other question I would ask you is I've seen around town, Stephen, and this is totally unrelated, I guess, a whole lot of steel plates, and I know that a few years ago, they left one on, and the plows just destroyed the plows and destroyed the steel plates. Do we have a policy of getting all the steel plates up around town before snow season, and if we don't, that's fine, just drop me a line, but there's an awful lot of steel plates around.
You're gonna buy stock and truck front ends?
Certainly in snowplow front end.
Yeah.
Richard?
Yeah, I had a couple quick, actually, your question, Mark, was it, you're entitled to have what you wanted, because that's not methods and means. You're telling them what the condition is you want it left in on that, so we're fully entitled to do that. I had one question. There's some of the alignment on some of the manholes on Merriweather that are pretty aggressive. Do you know, are they gonna bring these up a little bit, or is that the finished product for winter?
I think that's probably the finished product for winter.
Okay, I'd like to recommend that you take a drive at your convenience down there. and
The
see what you-
manholes are significantly below the level of the pavement.
But the pavement will settle and then come in line with the manholes over the course of the winter. It's binder coat. That's why you know what I'm talking about.
Unfortunately. I think that was it. That just kind of fuzzed my brain, because I don't think you've only got 2 inches down there anyway. Some of them are pretty good out of alignment. None of them are high, by the way, they're all low. So at least we're not gonna have a plow into a mark.
Or a sidewall.
Yeah, or sidewall, yeah.
Any other questions for Stephen?
I do.
Yeah.
It's on the casino.
Mhm.
So, I'm understanding that we still have not hired a traffic expert. Is that right?
Yes, that is right.
And, I mean, it's over a month later after we voted to do just that. And
We've selected one, if that helps, but we do not have an appropriation in hand to do that.
so is it your view that you are powerless to engage this traffic expert?
We don't have an appropriation to do that.
No, I understand, but do you feel that you're powerless to engage this traffic expert?
I don't know if powerless is the right word I would use. I would say we cannot sign a contract without an appropriation, and I believe that's a town bylaw.
I mean, this is kind of a,
Actually, it's Massachusetts law, it's not a town bylaw.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean,
Massachusetts.
MGL says you're not
Yes.
allowed to sign a, well, and Paul Pasturza said, reminded me, by the way, you don't have an appropriation to do this.
so I guess, I mean, this is an interesting, I mean, all these months of discussing and getting ready. So we were powerless to do anything until fall town meeting?
Alex, if that's how you want to describe it, I'm
Well,
not going
I
to argue
mean-
with your word choices. I would say we've done a lot, other than sign a contract that we do not have an appropriation for. I don't know that I would describe that as either powerless or doing nothing.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is, I think we talked in early September, we were behind the 8 ball, we've got a big problem here, and
When you say we,
the town,
okay.
yes. And this delay this just feels so wrong to me, the way we're approaching this. And I feel like we're on a road to a really bad outcome. And so I'm surprised to hear that we still haven't hired a traffic expert.
Can I just say something? We had a meeting on Friday or Friday, and I asked the same question. We know what we want. The problem is, and I got the answer from Stephen and from our attorneys, and from every other traffic person that Stephen has spoken to, is we need the MGM study. We need to, the assumptions are what our fight is about, correct? Am I saying that right?
That's right.
Okay, our fight is about the assumptions, not about the traffic study, because the traffic study is going to get done, and the words I used on Friday, and I think maybe even the last meeting, were numbers are numbers. The traffic study isn't going to be any different but it's the assumptions that go into that. So, to answer your question is, based on our experts that Stephen has spoken to, whether it's the attorneys or the traffic consultant we cannot hire yet, that we have to wait for that study before we actually can go after it and dissect it. That's where our fight is, not
That's-
necessarily
If
the
I
doer
might,
study.
we got a communication that suggested that's not the case. I mean, our attorney is suggesting that this occur as soon as possible to allow sufficient time for data collection if further data collection is necessary, which is sort of the issue I've been raising since August. You don't, it's sort of like doing a research project. You can start researching something, but sometimes you don't realize what else you need to research until you start writing it.
It's actually more like grading a research project.
And I would disagree with
Well,
that.
and honestly, Alex, I know you're not on the calls but I carry the water for you every time. Every time I talk to a traffic consultant, and now it's been multiple times, every time we talk to our lawyers about it, I ask them that very same question.
What?
Even though I already know the answer,
You asked the question, what?
should we do our own study now? And the answer, and I'm sorry if it doesn't make you feel better, but the answer is universally no. It doesn't help you to do that. The only right way to do this is to use MGM study and analyze it for its assumptions, conclusions, data collections, things like that. I can tell you that the attorneys they certainly feel that the timeline is compressed. They asked the MGC for an extension in the timeline, but there's no sense of panic or being behind the 8 ball on their end. There has certainly never been on my end.
Have you read this
And-
letter?
Which one?
It was dated, and again, I don't want to get into the comment of it, October 17th, because it's privileged, but
I can tell you that the attorneys and I are on the exact same page as of Friday. So whatever the date was, Friday, and I know they've sent some letters, and they feel some urgency to have a traffic consultant selected. But the bottom line is, and truthfully, a lot of this is on my end in terms of fully understanding how we transfer money for things like this. We need an appropriation. And I suppose we could have done a reserve fund request, but the timing of it made it so, using free cash.
see, that's why I was getting at the powerless.
Mm-hmm.
I was asking whether you were powerless, because
I would say that there are other avenues of
we had never
authority.
proceeded on the assumption that we were powerless to engage an expert. So this is a new one.
Well, I think selecting the expert was always the primary goal. we could never really engage them to begin work, or it was never really prudent to initiate them to begin work, because their step one for any traffic consultant is going to be take the MGM study and review it. And that was always step one. And then step two was going to be additional data collection or, traffic counts or things like that. And the timing of it has just worked out that we can pursue a free cash appropriation from town meeting to hire the consultants versus a reserve fund, because the MGM report has not been submitted yet.
And
So
do we
the
know when
timing of
that's
it
gonna
just-
be?
So I wouldn't say it's powerless, we're just choosing an avenue of authorities granted to us under the charter to fund it, but it really is just
Okay, I
six one half
understand.
does the other.
When do we expect the MGM study?
Honestly, any day. And that's not an input that I control, so I can't give you a deadline
No, I
on it
know.
because I don't set it or control, and I'm not producing the report, but I would have expected it by now, but any day
I mean, and that's coming from whom?
from MGM. And I know that the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission study, which will be commencing soon, which we are participating in, they'll need that study for their commencement of their work. I've not heard from MGM whether they have the study in hand, but I'm gonna guess that they'll have it soon. And
Because the latest that we heard was that they weren't gonna be completed until December,
the MIPA study,
but that includes the traffic. And-
But- it includes everything.
Right.
But certain
Traffic separate.
components of it can be done ahead of that. So, I say, I'm sorry it doesn't make you feel good, but it is what it is.
The proof will be in the pudding. The outcome, what we're able to obtain will be judged on that.
Well, like I said, I'm sorry, Richard.
Yeah, I think for the record, though, we need to put out here that the town manager's performance in regards to this issue has basically been in compliance with the board's wishes. I mean, you've briefed us on all the things, and we have voted on the issues that need to be voted on. And I understand Alex has had stress on this before, but you definitely have been working at the direction of the board.
I think so.
Yeah, and as far as I know, he's been within the direction of the board. But I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult process. The communications with the attorneys, they seem to really be on top of it and very aggressive in the various ways that they're going after gathering information and trying to position us, I think, in a very good position. I like the idea of going after the safety specialist and expert and looking at, because I think we all agree it's going to be fire and police is going to be a really important element of this. And I know MGM at some point we're trying to negotiate with us, letting them do that, but I like the expert that you seem to be looking at and bringing on board, and I think you're going to look at someone else. So it's a difficult process, and what's really even more difficult is realizing how are you going to make the connections between the two. We get the traffic and the impacts, and all of this is speculative on where it's coming down the line. And it's, the numbers are speculative, the assumptions are, and I think it's going to be a process that will extend even after we have an agreement. If the casinos do come in and it is MGM, it'll be something we'll be renegotiating year after year after year.
And that's something, and it may occur after our additional discussions with potential consultants that our attorneys advise us that we're really not going to get a bang for our probably unreimbursed buck for additional consulting. And there is a fiduciary responsibility that I have to not throw money away. And there is a possibility that hiring consultants for kind of uncertain or unmeasurable things is doing just that, because I don't have confidence that we'll get reimbursed for all that money. And it does come at the expense of either free cash or some other thing we're doing right now.
Any other questions for Stephen? I know we went over the 10 o'clock. So, I would, any select board comments before we close down?
Yeah, I just have two, and they both came out of the school building committee meeting last week, and I did already refer to the energy, so I won't do that again. But one thing that comes under the guise of good news, there was a potential cost of repairs to part of the, as a component of the pool system. It's called the surge tank, and they were looking at some significant cost to repair that through our project manager, contractors, subcontractors. The bottom line is our DPW was able to do it at no additional cost to the town outside of the cost of what we pay the DPW anyway and some supplies out of their supply station. So I think they deserve a whole lot of credit. It's a cost avoidance. I think the number was $25,000-$30,000.
$27,000.
That they were talking about at one point. So I just wanted to point that out. But I would also say that we've also identified a potential issue with the temperature control in the main school computer room. That's the room that houses all the servers that serve the entire town. And I only bring that up, not that I have a solution, but they're looking for a solution for the temperature control, and we may be asked as a select board to review and discuss and potentially approve or give authorization to spend money to modify the cooling systems in that HVAC room. There was some discussion at the school building committee meeting whether that authority should come to the come to the select board or stay within the school committee. And if anybody has any opinions, I certainly, voiced mine at that meeting. I know Stephen did, but if anybody else has any other opinions on whether requests for funds that will clearly exceed the current authority of the current, not authority, but the current expected level of bonding that the town has authorized, I'd be more than willing to welcome and listen to what you have to say. So I think that's my school building committee report.
Any other select board comments? Richard?
I have one, and it concerns something that we did tonight. I'm still quite concerned that we seem to brush over the issue on the streetlights rather quickly, and I'm glad that we've appropriated money to take care of the one, but I'm also dissatisfied that we are not aware of how many more problems that we have in our community right now that are identical to what took place down there. And I think, I believe that we should take these issues more seriously. I think there was a rush to judgment to get the money out, and I think there's a bigger puzzle out there that we have not touched.
Well, just to follow up on that, I think that, Stephen, you presented a potential solution for the problem, and I'm not trying to push the issue, but I think my sense, and I don't know if you got a sense of the entire select board, is, we should not feel we can't move forward with that because we don't have the appropriation. My sense is we have money in the budget. It's early enough in the fiscal year, and if we don't have money to repair the light that gets hit by a traffic accident or something down the road, or if for some reason the funds don't come through at fall town meeting to reimburse it, I think we need to address it later. But if we've got an identified and now recognized potential pedestrian issue, we ought to move forward with all due haste and not say we've got to wait for approval at the town meeting to fund it. My opinion, but I think, I don't know if you want more than one opinion from the select board.
I would just say, Mark, that I honestly thought it was it's not really a solution. It really is a Band-Aid just to help the pedestrian experience. The solution is new controllers, new signals, loop detectors, realigned intersection. That's the $1 million solution that's been planned since 2010. I think we were operating the assumption that the conditions and the pricing was going to be much less favorable based on all the information they had received and their analysis of this in the past. So this is kind of a different perspective by a different consultant and somewhat new information. And because the number is what it is, we were planning today to put a number on, because I thought it was going to be 100,000, which would require really an appropriation at fall town meeting.
Right.
So it was basically, let's do the warrant, and then Monday morning we'll figure out what the number is, just to make sure we're close for the article. So the article's closed, and then the article came back at a number. I think the timing of it is such that we can certainly engage the contractor, do the work, but I would still like to have the appropriation
Oh, I'm not saying.
on fall town meeting,
I
simply
agree.
because you could create, if nothing else happens or another transfer doesn't take place down the road, you create a budget stress or something else happens and.
I'm just saying, that, I would see the appropriation, the fall town meeting, reimburse, and maybe we're gonna change the wording at some point, reimburse that line item budget because we have one project that's $25,000 as opposed to
It's a
a whole
consensus,
bunch of
yeah.
projects that are $2,500.
If the consensus of the board is go ahead with the work and then we'll just backfill with the appropriation.
Is
I
that
thought we
the,
already had that discussion.
well,
I
is
think it was
it
just an
the?
opinion was expressed, not a directed
Yeah.
given.
Well, I don't think that's the point Richard was bringing up. I
That's
think
not.
that, and I agree with your point that, when we look at this is a reactionary vote, and that's fine.
It
We gotta
is.
take care of a problem, it's reactionary. My question would be, is we're in the top 10 safety issues in traffic with did that signal fall in town, number one. Where are the other 9? And to your point, it's all of them. I give you an example, and I know it's maybe not quite the traffic that's on Long Meadow Street there, I know it's not, but, we have a 4-way stop on Maple and Shaker. There's no crossing guards there at school time, there's none of that. It's a 4-way stop and people manage, and I'm not, so that could be a worse intersection for all I know than the one at Converse, but we don't know that. And I would hope that somewhere along the line that there would have been some sort of plan to upgrade these, and I don't, again, Richard, I agree with you. I think that it is reactionary, it's an issue that has to be taken care of, but there could be 10 others just like it that we don't even know about. And I think that's the point you were making, if I. Okay.
That was the point.
I have just a couple of questions about the town manager's report, which was all the documents that were sent from the department heads. We have two documents that are conflicting from DPW with the work that's going to be done on Greenwood. In one report, it talks about the work being delayed, the other report talks about the work going ahead. And I don't know, I couldn't find a date on either one of those documents to tell me which one came first. And I don't know where we stand on that, but there was 2 reports under DPW. There were 2 separate reports under DPW. One saying it was delayed and one saying it was progressing, so I don't know.
Is it the electrical?
The Greenwood Electrical, so I don't know which one is more accurate.
Probably the one that says it's going to proceed. Yeah, I mean, the work is going to proceed. I think if it's the building facilities report, I usually get that pretty early in the month, in the first few days of the month. The other report, because information was evolving, came later, and I think that there was some question, and I don't know enough about the details of it, but there was some question about can they do the work, and there were some circumstances that called the ability to start the work on the electrical in question at Greenwood because of the panel or something like that. But I think they have worked it out since in between the 2 reports, so.
Okay. The other one was, there was a keypad up at Greenwood, which was for the daycare. And it's something like a $14,000 repair, or I don't know if it's an upgrade or a
Upgrade.
repair. It's an upgrade. Where was that in terms of capital planning, and why was that done now versus bringing it forward into the capital planning season, or?
It's a security issue. Because I think part of it was, I'd have to go back and look at the report. But they monitor the door.
Yeah.
And the keypad makes it less labor, less costly to have somebody sitting there in the booth monitoring the door, and I think they had somebody leave. I think that was the issue, but I'd
They
have
had
to go back and
somebody
look at the report.
leave?
What?
They had somebody leave? Is that-
Employee. Like someone who works there watching the door.
Yeah.
I thought that
They already
person.
had, but they've had a keypad on there for as
Isn't-
long as I know.
I don't think it was working.
Okay, so it wasn't working. All right.
The bottom line is that it's a security issue.
Okay. Then there was something mentioned through the assessor's report of a property where there's a huge discrepancy in terms of tax valuation. We just got hammered with that $85,000 that's on the town meeting warrant. And I would like to ask that we have a report as to what our risk is with that property, so that we don't have another $85,000 issue hit us like we did with Twin Hills. It's in the assessor's report. I don't necessarily need to go into the details on there, but they're talking about it's about $1 million discrepancy in the value of the building. And we lost that battle with Twin Hills. and it's costing us some significant dollars, and I don't want to be surprised about this, 2 years down the road, that all of a sudden we have a, they go down to Boston and they get it reversed, and we owe them a big sum of money. So either that, or we should be taking care of that in our overlay account, which we haven't.
We set aside money for abatements.
Every year for abatements, but that's an average amount. This is $1 million discrepancy, and I think we need to be a little bit more briefed by the assessors perhaps about what this issue is and what's our risk to it. And only because right now we're paying off Twin Hills at this next meeting.
Is that, so does the board want the assessor to come to a meeting and get questions about this?
I'm asking for more information. I don't know if the board wants more information, but.
I don't see putting it on the agenda, but if Paul's
I'm just looking
asking just
information,
for
yeah. I mean,
response.
what's our
and
risk out there with it, and
just a follow-up on where the discussion's going between the, and I didn't know if that was the assessors or the building. It was the assessor. Any other questions?
It's in the Finance Department report update,
under assessors.
under
okay.
assessors, Stephen.
Yeah, it's, wait.
I don't know, my comment is, while we were sitting here through this meeting, East Long Meadow Town Meeting approved its anti-casino resolution. And for me, that's a reminder of how powerful our concerted action could be. If we were like a town like Hopkinton, we would be clear that we're against this casino, and we're gonna be urging the Gaming Commission not to approve the license in Springfield. If we were like Hopkinton, we'd be reaching out to East Long Meadow, Wilbraham, other towns, to present a united front against this casino. The fact that we're not doing it, I think, is a missed opportunity. The reason why I'm not seriously suggesting that we pursue it, because we can't even ourselves take a position. If we can't even ourselves take a position on what Long Meadow wants, how are we going to act in concert with other towns? And to me, the best thing we could do for Long Meadow on this casino issue is to try to stop the casino from coming to Springfield. We're working on the very tiniest of margins, when we're trying to work out this mitigation agreement. We're gonna do the best we can, hopefully, if we can ever get going on it. But the thing that's gonna make a qualitative difference is whether or not that casino license is issued in Springfield. And it's too bad that we're not exercising leadership and doing more on it.
We will be having the casino forum on October 30th at 7:30 at the high school. And it will be televised, and as well as we're hoping to do live streaming, but you'll have updates of that on the website. Any further
Yeah. I have a couple.
announcements? Yeah.
One is, I would ask that everybody on this board be equally notified of reports from our attorneys regarding the casino, because they're going to Marie and you, they think they're going to you via email. Tonight, we just got a hard copy because it was sent at the last minute, and I would request that every bit of correspondence go to all 5 of the board members at the same time, and not to be distributed to just a person, so that we're all seeing it at the same time. I think that is a simple request.
Do you mean directly from the attorneys?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why it should just go to you and Marie, and then we're getting a document right before the meeting tonight. We all could have had that a little bit earlier, and that's not on you. I'm asking that the board support us getting the documents all at the same time. I don't think there's anything negative in that I can see. None of it, I mean, if it's privilege, it's marked privilege. They do a good job of that, so I just think that we should all have it at the same time.
I agree with that.
That's, it's a simple request. All they gotta do is get all 5 of our email addresses, and they're on the website, and, in fact, save the hard copy. I don't even think we need it by mail, in my opinion, but that's it.
That's fine. Any other announcements or comments?
Just a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Good. That's what you were looking for.
Yes.
About 3 hours ago.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Stephen got